Lord of the Mysteries, Fire of Destruction, chapter 361 to 370. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and her breathing was slightly irregular. Despite the several times she went into cogitation, her nervousness always returned. But at least it had calmed her enough to ask for a carriage to her work. It's all right, it's all right. Grandpa will know what to do. Consoling herself, Vivian bit down hard on her lower lip. The worst-case scenario had happened. She had been discovered by the wise owls. How long had she been exposed? Was she being watched now? Why would a team leader reveal himself like that and not attack her? Wasn't that what official Beyonders did? She never thought someone like Harvey Wayne would be the leader of the wise owls. He didn't carry himself like one. He always seemed relaxed and calm. He didn't mind how she acted and even returned the attitude. He wasn't like the bald-headed, tight-assed monkeys her grandfather described so disdainfully. She had even painted him as one of the progressive men Emperor Russell was fond of saying in referring to himself. But it turns out that someone so free-minded was a wise owl. And not only that, but he was the leader of a team. That meant he had to be at least sequence 7. The scene of the man exhaling fire like a dragon was still etched in her mind. Closing her eyes, Vivian opened and closed her fists several times to feel them again. Once that was done, she reached into her bosom and pulled out her small container with her cigarettes. Pulling one out, she quickly lit it and took a deep puff. More than half of the cigarette was consumed, and Vivian felt herself relax as her lungs filled with smoke. Exhaling, a large cloud of smoke billowed out of the carriage window. A fleeting thought crossed her mind as Vivian was about to take another puff and finish her cigarette. If Harvey Wayne wanted to attack her, it wouldn't be crazy to think that he could use the lit cigarette butt to blow up her face. Her eyes moved to the red butt, which now seemed to glow with a certain danger that Vivian hadn't noticed before. The next second, she forcefully stubbed out the cigarette in the ashtray of the carriage, crushing and grinding it with extra force to make sure no embers survived. Bump bump, bump bump bump. Her heart, which had been beating normally until a moment ago, was racing again, and to make matters worse, her head began to hurt. A while later, Briarwood Chambers. The receptionist, Alexia Trunken, was finishing greeting a client when she saw Vivian walking briskly past. She could only greet her with a nod, which the woman ignored and walked rapidly up the stairs. I'll never understand what her problem is. Rolling her eyes internally, critical of her co-worker's rude personality, Alexia returned her attention to the beautiful customer. Excuse me, Miss Jane, Mr. Gideon Blackwell is currently away from the firm finishing a contract. He will return in the afternoon around 2:40 if you can come by. If not, I can schedule a meeting for tomorrow. I appreciate your kindness. I'll be stopping by again this afternoon, but if Mr. Gideon doesn't return yet, I'm afraid I'll have to bother you with scheduling the meeting. A young woman sighed as she slowly shook her head. Don't worry, Miss Jane. You will never make trouble for me. Smiling at the young woman, Alexia closed the notebook she was using. Would that be all, or do you need help with anything else? The young woman in front of her laughed softly. That will be all. Have a good afternoon, Ms. Alexia. You too. May wisdom always be with you. The young woman nodded with a smile, turned, and walked to the exit. Behind her, a shorter woman followed. Alexia couldn't see her face well because she always wore a curtained hat. All she could see was the long black hair falling down her back. Vibrant and silky, almost as beautiful as the older woman's brown hair. I'm sure she's just shy. Shaking her head, Alexia picked up a notebook at her side, opened it where she had left it last time, and began to read quietly. Reaching her office on the 3rd floor, Vivian unlocked it with her key and entered. Closing it back up, the woman looked around with an eye worthy of an art critic, searching for any changes to how she had left it when she left. Wandering around it, Vivian checked every corner and nook and cranny, every book and shelf, but everything was still the same as she remembered. Still not satisfied, she pulled a pendulum from a hidden pocket of her dress. She planned to make a divination to ensure no one had been here. The barbarians' abilities have little or nothing to do with mysticism, but that doesn't stop them from learning simple methods of divination. Letting the pendulum dangle from her right wrist, Vivian closed her eyes. Someone other than me was in my office since this morning. She repeated the prayer 7 times in her mind and entered a state of semi-cogitation. Although the sentence was not entirely accurate, Vivian was not worried. The cleaners were coming by in the afternoon, so in theory, only she should have entered her office. After a few seconds, the barbarian opened her eyes and looked at the result. The pendulum was spinning clockwise at a decent speed. A positive result. Nodding slowly, Vivian would accept this result for now. Pocketing the pendulum in her hidden pocket, she walked over to her desk and opened the second drawer. Numerous books and documents greeted her, but that was not what she was looking for. Reaching the bottom of the drawer, she grabbed an object hidden there, stuck under the top drawer. Pulling it out, she unsheathed it, and the silver knife glittered. Walking to the corner of the room, she chewed some spirituality on the tip of the knife and moved from corner to corner, forming a wall of spirituality. Once that was done, she returned to her desk and pulled out another object from another drawer. In her hands, Vivian now held a simple white bone flute. She took a deep breath and played the flute, but no sound came from it. Wasting no time, the barbarian activated her spiritual vision. After a few moments, a little white ball formed on her desk. This ball then grew at least 3 times its size until it was about the size of a small child's head, then a large mouth with thick purple lips formed on its surface. The spirit coughed a few times, changing its tone from supernatural to that of an old man. Cough, cough, ugh, that never feels good. The spirit growled and made a bitter grimace with his mouth before it turned into a large grin. Ah, but if it isn't my favorite granddaughter, what's wrong, my love? You finally decided to give up on that silly dream of yours. Vivian grunted. I'm your only granddaughter, Grandpa. And no, I haven't given up. Then why are you summoning my messenger? Just a few weeks ago, you said you wanted to use the letters like normal people and followed through on that. Why break your record now? The spirit smacked its thick lips in doubt. I wouldn't be using it if the situation wasn't urgent. The wise owls have discovered me. Vivian shouted with anger that was mixed with a bit of her fear and anxiety. What? The little ball messenger shouted in shock. Are you all right? They didn't do anything to you. Don't worry, my love. Your grandpa is going to save you now. The ball began to shake and bounce up and down, its mouth moving rapidly and its voice losing some of its human tone. Vivian was alarmed at this. Although the wall of spirituality contained the sound, it was not absolute. So she quickly tried to calm the spirit. I'm fine, Grandpa. They haven't done anything to me. In fact, I think the team leader offered me a job in a firm he just bought. The anxious spirit ball stopped bouncing back and forth. His mouth slamming shut, he slowly turned around and looked at her. The corners of the young girl's lips trembled slightly as an expressionless cue ball scrutinized her. After a few seconds of being criticized unseen, the ball broke the silence. You didn't hit your head. I swear, Grandpa, it's true. He offered me a job at the new firm I helped him buy. Vivian repeated, still in disbelief at what had happened a few moments ago in that office. The ball was silent for a few moments, the person behind clearly processing what he was hearing. What you're telling me doesn't fit the way those tight asses act. Are you sure this was a member of the Wise Owls and not a wild Beander? He said he had a team and didn't deny that he was part of them either when I accused him. Vivian replied in frustration. But he didn't claim it either, the ball countered, a heavy sigh escaping from its thick lips. Oh, Emma. It took a few seconds for her to process what her grandfather had just pointed out. As soon as she caught it, her expression flushed, and she immediately tried to defend herself. You don't understand, Grandpa. He was so trusting and carried himself with such an attitude that I never questioned whether he was or not. I'm sure he would have fooled you, too. Just say you were lost in his eyes. It's less embarrassing. The spirit sighed again, its sigh carrying decades of experience and his way of saying he was too old for this. Grandpa, the barbarian growled in embarrassment, wanting with all her might to burst the flute in her hands on her family's head. Emma, my dear granddaughter, from what you are telling me, he never threatened or attacked you at any time. From the sound of it, his intentions are not to harm you. Ignoring how his granddaughter wished to sink into the ground, he gave his view on the subject. You do not appear to be in danger at the moment. Whether this man is a wise owl or not is not what matters now. His offer to recruit you is the most real thing we have on him. If you wish and if you feel you are in danger, I can get you out of Lindbergh tonight, but in return, you will be grounded for 2 months. Quote. I understand, grandfather. Calming down a little, Emma gave a soft nod. Sighing a little, she said, I think I can still control this. I have a meeting with him tomorrow, where I will see what his true intentions are. If he poses a threat, I will use your gift to escape. It sounds like what he offered you is pretty juicy if you plan to return to him. What was it? He offered me no. He told me he could get me the formulas and ingredients I needed to advance, then he called me by the name of my sequence. I have no idea how he knew. At no point did I show any barbarian skills, and the ones I used were not the kind you can easily detect. Interesting. The ball mumbled. He must be a Beander with rich experience if he can identify your pathway with so little. Sigh. I will leave the decision in your hands, my granddaughter. I'm sure you will make the right one. Thank you for your vision, grandfather. Emma grasped the edges of her dress and curtsied softly. She pursed her lips a little before saying, if it wouldn't be too much trouble, I'd like you to investigate his identity. The ball moved side to side as if rolling invisible shoulders. Sure, it's possible his identity is fake, but I'll see what I can get. What's his name? Harvey Wayne. There was a sudden pause from the other side. Grandfather. It's nothing, dear, just a little surprised. Wayne, you say? The ball asked, a little shocked. Confused, Emma nodded. Yes, Harvey Wayne. Why, is it a name you know? I don't know the first name, but I know the last name. He mumbled a little. In his early days, before he was known as the Son of Steam, Emperor Russell tried to sell some short stories about superheroes, published in picture books he called comics, but it was an immediate failure. Seeing that he didn't get the attention he wanted, he abandoned the idea of comics and never published anything again. Only 5 stories were published: Superman, Spider-Man, The Flash, the X-Men, and the Batman. The Batman story was about a multi-millionaire kid who, after witnessing the murder of his parents as a child, vows to fight crime dressed as a bat. Why are you telling me this, Grandpa? Emma rolled her eyes at this history lesson. That's what I'm getting at, dear. The ball growled in frustration. That boy's name was Bruce Wayne. The barbarian's eyes widened a bit, and her mouth hung slightly. Wow, what a coincidence. Yeah, a coincidence. The man mumbled mysteriously before laughing in amusement. I'll see what I can get from Batman. Take care, my dear. Wait, Grandpa. Before she could stop him, the ball in front of her quickly shrunk and disappeared. Groaning in exasperation, Emma sank her face into her desk. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. The following day, Victoria Street. I need a cigarette and a drink. Vivian let out a long, low growl, pure exasperation and pure annoyance on her face. In front of her was Apex Financial Solution, the firm she had helped a potential wise owl obtain. This guy doesn't waste any time. The woman raised an eyebrow, watching multiple blue-collar workers move around the building, taking notes and discussing repairs. Several passers-by on the street watched this as well, some with curiosity and some interest, coming over to see what was going on. It had barely been a day since he had bought it, and he had already begun to repair the firm. Harvey Wayne was either very sure he could get this dead business back on its feet, or he was very stupid. Or he had a lot of money and no idea what to spend it on. Any one of those 3 options was possible. Shaking her head, Vivian adjusted the bracelets on her arms a little. That done, she entered through the huge double doors of the firm. Strolling through the reception area, she could see more blue-collar workers checking everything and being escorted by a well-groomed young man. Ignoring them, she walked to the stairs. Her heels clicked on the tiles with a resounding tap 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 tap. Excuse me, miss. Snorting somewhat annoyed, Vivian turned to whoever had called her, and the well-groomed young man from before looked her way with a severe expression. What do you want? I have a meeting with your boss, and I can't waste time. The expression on his face softened, and his eyes widened slightly. Oh. Then you must be Mrs. Vivian. Yes, Mr. Wayne informed us that you would be stopping by. He's waiting for you in the office. I'd accompany you if I could, but I have. Yes, I know. You have to accompany the revisions. The barbarian rolled her eyes disinterestedly. If that was all, I have a meeting to attend. Yes, go ahead. I'm Assistant Eleanor, by the way. Don't care. Having already turned off her hearing, Vivian ignored the man completely, turned around, and walked up the stairs. Pursing his lips and frowning slightly, Eleanor could only return to his work. Criticizing the woman for being so rude. Arriving on the 4th floor, Vivian lightened her walk and the force with which she was stepping. Her heels now barely clicked. Her almost silent footsteps guided her to the last door on the floor, and, unlike yesterday, the plaque was no longer on it. Stopping in front of the nameless door, Vivian clenched and unclenched her fists a few times. Her heart was pounding so hard that she felt her brain beating in rhythm with it. Letting out a soundless sigh and closing her eyes, she went into semi-cogitation to calm down a bit. Once calmer, the woman opened her eyes and raised her right hand in a fist. "You may come in, Miss Vivian. Not only did you hear me coming, but you know who I am. What do you have?" Super hearing. Pursing her lips, Vivian considered whether this was a good idea. "It's okay, I still have the gift." The normally cold metal on her neck now felt like a silent guardian protecting her with its shield and sword. Ready to slay her enemies. With more courage, Vivian grabbed the knob and opened the door, stepping into the room. "You're later than I thought. It's almost 11, Harvey Wayne pointed, not looking up from the documents he was reading. Besides the papers, she could notice a beautiful black pocket watch. Well, at least it's safe to say he has money if he can buy that kind of watch. Vivian noticed the fine details that pointed out how high quality it was. "You're weird. Has anyone ever told you that? How did you do that?" She grunted as she looked around the office. Almost nothing had changed. The only difference she found was that the symbol of the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom now hung on the mural behind Wayne's seat, above the paintings of the previous owners. Hearing the lawyer's question, Adrian could only laugh in amusement. "By your steps, Miss Vivian, you should lay off the booze and start exercising. Your belly is starting to show." The woman's face froze, and an expression of disbelief was plastered on it. Unconsciously, her eyes lowered to her stomach. Not being able to hold it, Adrian began to chuckle. "Ha ha ha, I'm just joking, Mrs. Vivian. You look very good for your age. Please stop playing games, Mr. Wayne." Recovering, Vivian gritted her teeth, her cheeks a little red. She hadn't expected that teasing as soon as she arrived. "Hoo-hoo, excuse me. You look too tense. I thought innocent playfulness would do you good. Joking with a lady's weight is not gentlemanly. I didn't know you were a lady, I thought you were a barbarian." With all the finesse this lady can summon. "Fuck you, Mr. Wayne." Chuckling in amusement, Adrian finally looked up from the documents he was reading. His coal black eyes sparkled mischievously. "I'm glad you've come, and well, what's your decision?" "I'll stop you there." Raising a hand, Vivian silenced the man, who closed his mouth but kept a slight smile on his face. Sighing a little, she straightened her back a little to make herself taller and stared into the man's black eyes. "Before jumping into anything, are you a wise owl?" Raising one hand into the air and placing another over his heart, Adrian closed his eyes and said solemnly, "I swear by knowledge and wisdom, that I am a member of the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, and if not, may lightning strike down and judge me as the sinner that I am." "You crazy fuck." Incredulous, Vivian jumped backward, trying to get as far away from this lunatic as possible. She only wanted to know if he was a wise owl, not for him to swear an oath of that sort. Before she could continue her escape, her back slammed hard against the door. A loud thud reverberated through the office, and Vivian could only stare frozen at the man who had finally opened his eyes. Smiling gently at her, Adrian nodded graciously. "Now, do you believe me, Miss Vivian?" "Princess, remember I'm still here," Flora said flatly, if a little nervously. Swallowing her breath, Vivian returned the nod. I think so, Mr. Wayne." Turning away from the closed door, the barbarian felt cold sweat trickle down her neck. She hadn't closed the door. "Please take a seat. I think our conversation will take a while, so why not do it while we're comfortable?" Adrian gestured calmly to one of the seats in front of him. Vivian nodded tensely and took one of them, moving it a little further away from the man's desk, who said nothing about it. Once seated, the lawyer just grunted and stared into his eyes. "Why don't you arrest me? I'm a wild meander, isn't that your job? You haven't caused any trouble so far, of course, apart from being a pleasure to be around, you're all right." I don't have to waste my time with you, other feral beyonders require more attention. Adrian explained. Why do you want me to join your team? Is the contract method so simple? Adrian, who had been taken as a member of the church at the whim of one of its members, smiled, amused. You can put it that way. But you're getting confused. I don't want you on my team. Well, not yet. For now, I want you to work for me at the firm, helping me with whatever legal problems are coming our way. If that's all it is, why did you offer to help me with my ingredients and formulas? Was it all a lie of yours? Vivian narrowed her eyes. Suspicion was clear on her face. Adrian waved his hand in disinterest. I do not lie, Miss Vivian. Everything I have told you has been the unvarnished truth. If you join my firm, your problems with ingredients and formulas will be over. I will take care of everything. Prove it, Vivian said with a serious expression, her gaze cutting. Oh, Adrian raised an interested eyebrow. Prove what you say is true, and I join, the barbarian explained, and her gaze sharpened further. It is very difficult to obtain the potion formulas from the lawyer pathway. The only ways I know of are to either join the crew of a sea king or become part of Intis royalty. Those are the guaranteed ones, otherwise, you have to try your luck outside. It's obvious that you are neither. So if you have a way to get it, then prove it. Vivian finished tightly, squinting even more. Adrian smiled some more. Princess, why don't you tell her the name of a sequence from her path? I'm sure that will win her over. Flora recommended, observing the conversation. That harlot is a barbarian. The following sequence to that one is Briber. I'm sure that'll be more than enough. The name of sequence 2 of the lawyer pathway is, Adrian said as if he was talking about the weather, with extreme casualness and unimportance. The aggression with which Vivian was watching him disappeared in an instant. That distrust that burned like a flame was extinguished by a tsunami. The woman's mouth and eyes widened like saucers and visibly trembled. Disbelief and pure bewilderment were etched in her expression. What did you say? The barbarian whispered, trembling. Her pupils shrinking. Princess, you're joking, right? The Jacob stuttered, but the black-haired man's smile grew, shocking the noblewoman even more. This bastard had said the name of a sequence angel to a Beander who was barely a sequence 8. Laughing softly at both women's reactions, Adrian rested his cheek on his hand. His glittering eyes narrowed. Is that enough for you? I can tell you the name of sequence 1 if you like. No need. Holding up both hands, Vivian stopped Harvey from continuing. Her face paled, and a small layer of sweat formed. This was not what she had planned. It was only supposed to be a simple test to determine whether he was serious. She would have been satisfied if it had been the name of sequence 6, even if it had been the name of sequence 5. She didn't expect the man to tell her the name of a sequence as high as 2, he even seemed to know the name of sequence 1. Huff 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 huff, her hands were shaking, and she found herself swallowing saliva. I underestimated him too much. This guy is not a mere church member. His rank has to be much higher than team leader. A trembling smile formed on her face. She may have bitten off more than she could chew. This is good, this is good. If he has information as important as the name of sequence 2 and 1 of a path, he might know something about it. But I can't ask now. Something like that is not something I can just say. He'll look at me like I'm crazy. I need to gain his trust, prove myself to him. Once I do that, I can ask him. Even if he knew nothing, it was obvious that she could get closer to fulfilling her dream if she joined him. Giving a weak nod, Vivian slowly lowered her arms. While it was dangerous, she could see the opportunity in this danger. Give me a few days to give my resignation to Briarwood Chambers. By Saturday, I'll be working for you. Wonderful. Clapping his hands satisfactorily, Adrian rose from his seat and walked around his desk. Vivian also rose from her seat and stood before the man, still a little nervous. Extending his right hand, the smile on the black-haired man's face grew. You may not have officially joined yet, but let me welcome you. Coughing slightly, Vivian grabbed the hand and shook it. I'll do my best. A few hours later. Now, Adrian was alone in the office. The light coming in through the window was now orange. Dusk was coming to an end, and night was approaching. He had spent the whole day reviewing all the firm's debts and problems, along with the problems in the building the contractor had found and the price he was asking for the repairs. Dieter, I was wrong about you. Not only are you useless, you're a waste of oxygen." Clicking his tongue in annoyance, Audrian signed and pushed the paper aside. Adding up the debts and the repairs the building needed, the money it would cost totaled 45,000 sasam. No wonder he was so hurried to sell everything and leave. Not only was the mafia after him, but the IRS would be after him soon. Shaking his head, Audrian could only sigh. He could only be thankful that the bastard only had the firm for 4 years. Luckily, he still had plenty of money saved up, so he could afford to pay it all off. He had £42,192 when he arrived in Limburg, which he quickly converted more than half of into the country's currency. With £1 worth 3 sasam, he was left with 90,000 sasam. That left him with £12,192 in his savings. "Princess, do you really know the name of Sequence 1 of the lawyer pathway?" Flora suddenly asked. "Yes, I do. Do you want to know?" Audrian asked calmly as he set a document aside, placing it on top of a rather large pile. Flora thought about it for a few moments. The cryptologist in her whispering in her ear to say yes, but reason telling her it was a bad idea. After an intense psychological debate, the Jacob replied, "I'm fine, your loss," Audrian said, visibly disappointed. Making sure that the candles were in place and that the symbol drawn on the paper was identical to the one behind his seat of honor atop the gray fog. Klein could only draw a tense sigh. This was the 6th time he had checked that everything was for his experiment. This time, the experiment would be much more dangerous, so everything had to be perfect, there could be no mistakes. In front of Klein was a simple altar. On it were 2 candles, one large and one smaller. The larger candle was above the pupil-less eye and contorted lines, and the smaller one was placed in the middle of the symbol. In front of all these things was a single gold coin, £1. Having finished checking, Klein could only nod with narrowed eyes. Okay, everything seems to be ready. This time, he would try to sacrifice the coin to himself. Using Chariot's messenger summoning method only modified it so that, instead of targeting a messenger, it would target his identity as the fool. Rising, Klein grabbed the silver dagger he had prepared earlier and raised a wall of spirituality around the altar. He then took 4 steps, taking his place in the seat of honor in the space above the gray mist. Klein remained calm, extended his arm from which his topaz pendulum was already hanging, and closed his eyes. Going into semicogitation, he repeated in his mind 7 times. "It's safe to pray to me. It's safe to pray to me. It's safe to pray to me." Opening his eyes after the 7th repetition, Klein nodded as he saw how the pendulum was swinging with a decent clockwise speed. Having confirmed that it was safe, Klein wasted no time and quickly simulated the sensation of falling. Returning to his body, the clown did not hurry but sat back and waited for the spirituality he had expended to recover. After 20 minutes and feeling his tank full, everything was ready for his experiment. Lighting the candles, Klein closed his eyes, pressed his palms together, and prayed in ancient Hermes. "The fool that doesn't belong to this era. You are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog. You are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Your fervent servant prays for your attention. I pray that you take these offerings. I pray that you will open the gates to your kingdom." The ancient language reverberated in the wall of spirituality, and a wind formed in it. All this condensed into the larger candle that represented the fool, concentrating and breaking through an illusory door. Distant whispers reached his ears. He retraced the 4 steps along with the chants, returning to his seat of honor. His attention was immediately caught by the spirituality that seemed to move through the air and stimulate this mysterious space. Without wasting time and following his instinct, the clown extended his spirituality towards it. The illusory door that had appeared in the real world also formed in the space above the gray mist, and with a thought, it opened. Klein could see himself kneeling in front of the altar and the gold coin in front of it. Without wasting a second, stretching out his will, he watched as the coin trembled for an instant before shooting back out of the doorway and through it, flying to stand in front of him. Feeling his spirituality draining ridiculously fast, Klein cut off the supply to the door, and it closed. Huff! With a mighty exhale of air escaping him, Klein sank back in his seat and stared agitatedly at the crimson star-filled dome. Calming down a little more, the clown grabbed the gold coin and began to play with it. His face filled with excitement. Now the Tarot Club will be more magnificent than before, and just in time to celebrate the arrival of a new member. Sigh, sulking, Klein placed the coin on the table and began to roll it around. With his experiment paying off, the clown did not stay in the mysterious space any longer and returned to his body. Shortly after, he ate the food he had prepared before coming and took a 1-hour nap to regain his lost spirituality. Once that was done, Klein put on the costume he had bought. He left his rented room and returned to his flat by carriage. But he didn't go anywhere near his house. He got off several blocks earlier and changed into his normal appearance in an alley. He made several detours, and only once did he return home. It was early morning when he arrived, so he had to avoid making too much noise to wake the neighbors. I know how annoying it is to wake up because the guy upstairs just decided to remodel the living room at 5 a.m. Remembering old times, Klein used his clown powers to move silently through the corridors to his flat. His movements were similar to those of a house cat who went out at night to see his stray companion and was only just returning home after a night of adventures. Tired after such a night, Klein just made himself a quick and simple breakfast and lay down to sleep, waking up about 4 hours later. When he recovered, the clown tidied himself up and took the "Do Not Disturb" sign off his door. He waited to see if anyone would come in need of his skills. To his luck, only 2 hours after he removed the sign, a loud ding dong sounded. Someone had pulled the rope on the door. Rising from the sofa, Klein calmly walked to the door, the image of the person behind it already forming in his mind. An image that made him pause for a moment was that of 2 men. Both wore similar clothes, simple shirts with brown cloth belts and black baggy trousers. They looked pretty large, with the physique of someone who goes to the gym frequently but doesn't watch their diet. Their features were not typical of a Lindbergh, they looked more like those of the Lowen Kingdom. None of them were saying anything, just glancing occasionally at the ends of the hallway as if waiting for someone to come along. Klein processed this mental image and seriously considered whether or not he should open the door or jump out the window and escape. Those guys looked very suspicious. I didn't just choose the neighborhood where I have to pay extra rent, did I? That would be terrible luck. Klein regretted not having a gun with him. If things escalated, he could only defend himself with the cards in his pockets and his combat skills. Even if he was Sequence 8 and the people outside were ordinary people, he didn't know if they were armed. If he had the time, he would climb into the space above the gray mist to divine over these guys. Unfortunately, he didn't have that luxury now. Why must it be so hard to find a dealer when you need one? Klein complained as, with a flick of his wrist, his topaz pendulum hung. Closing his eyes, he went into semi-cogitation and repeated 7 times in his mind. It is safe to open the door. It is safe to open the door. He could only rely on his danger sense as a clown and a simple divination, which was better than nothing. Opening his eyes and watching the pendulum swing clockwise, Klein made another 2 divinations. Having gone through Seer, he knew that divination was powerful but not omnipotent. It could be manipulated and tricked. After 2 more positive results, Klein took this as a thumbs up and opened the door to his house with a casual smile. "Good morning, gentlemen. Sorry, I'm late. You are Sherlock Moriarty, the detective?" one of the men asked, holding a newspaper advertising his services. He just sighed internally at their distinct lack of manners and the fact that they had never mentioned any book they were reading, the usual polite way to start a conversation in Lindbergh when visiting someone. "I'm an idiot," Klein thought in disgust with himself, suddenly realizing what a horrible idea it had been to put his home address. He could only lament inwardly. Outwardly he gave a small smile and nodded. "That's me. Would you like to come in so we can talk more comfortably?" The big men gave each other a momentary glance before nodding. Klein moved to the side and opened the door further, giving them enough room to pass through. Without turning his back on them, he closed the door but did not lock it, he just motioned with the key. This was so that if he had to escape, he would have another escape route other than jumping out the window. "Would you like some coffee or tea?" "We don't have time for that." The brown man cut in. "We're looking for one of our own who went missing 2 weeks ago. We need you to help us find him." Klein watched this with a flat expression. Am I going to help find a debtor for the mob? Should I do it? What if it was just a person who had made a wrong decision and escaped? Or what if they were just a snitch or a traitor to them? The mere thought that his decision might kill someone innocent caused a lurch in his stomach that he didn't show. But it gave him an idea. Could you tell me more about this person you seek? Their appearance, what did they wear before they disappeared? One of the men pulled a neatly folded piece of paper from his waistcoat and handed it to him. These are all the details about the person we're looking for. Grabbing the outstretched paper, Klein unfolded it, and the first thing he noticed was the half-decent handwriting. 15 years old, damaged and oily black hair, light green eyes, 5 feet 6, tall. He keeps muttering things to the air, usually about things he sees but they're not there. The last time he was seen he was wearing a tattered brown shirt and black sailor's trousers, with plain shoes and no socks. What is this? A guy with mental problems who escaped from the asylum. These guys aren't mobsters but somewhat aggressive psychiatrists. The clown found himself a little surprised. A sense of familiarity scratched his cheek, and Klein immediately noticed it. This was a reminder of his spirituality. Lowering the paper and smiling at the duo, Klein said, "Excuse me, but I have to go to the bathroom, I'll be back in a moment." Somewhat shocked, the men only nodded in confusion. Ignoring his embarrassment for using such a preschool excuse, Klein held back his desire to walk quickly as he moved to his bathroom. Click. Now alone and with the door locked, the smile on his face was broken and bitter, it was such that he might as well have been crying. What a shame. Shaking his head in resignation, Klein grabbed the silver dagger in his bathroom for each tarot club and raised a wall of spirituality. His pride smaller than before. In the great palace above the gray fog. Taking his place in the seat of honor, Klein grabbed the red fountain pen that manifested itself next to a parchment and wrote a sentence on it. Repeating those lines 7 times, Klein placed the paper on his chest, hugged it and closed his eyes, falling asleep in a moment with the help of cogitation. In the dream, countless lights of infinite colors danced and intermingled, quickly creating a scene. It is a beautiful city, with morning sunbathing. One of the 2 rivers, the Koi River, comes from the northern York Mountains and passes through the University District in the East Borough. The Tussock River merges with the city. Tingen. Klein couldn't look at his home for long because the next second, the scenery changed. Now, he saw 2 people walking down a rather ugly street. A young man wearing cheap formal clothes and an older man wearing a black tunic and a felt black hat with a rounded edge. Both were talking about the area when suddenly, the young man turned to the side. To where he turned was a young man standing with his hands on his head. The young man was quite dirty. His black hair looked greasy, oily, and badly groomed, and his skin was also quite pale. The young boy looked up as if feeling he was being watched. His dark green, almost black eyes, lacking luster, looked demoralized and had a hint of madness. As soon as his eyes met the young boy's, he began to weep blood. A dead laugh escaped his lips. "Ah, you have the stench of death." The stage shattered like a mirror being struck by a hammer, but Klein did not wake up. The fragments condensed into one, revealing an older man with a deep gaze. In his calloused hands, he was holding a coat guard that was open in 2. In one of the pictures was a visibly pregnant woman with shining black eyes and silver blonde hair. Hugging her from behind was a man slightly younger than her, with short black hair and small eyes. On the other, there was a much older photo. This one was of a man much like the one holding the necklace, holding in his hands a chubby baby with a bit of platinum blonde hair on its little head. Then the dream broke, and Klein awoke with a deep breath of air. That's why he looked so familiar. It's that half-monster boy at the Evil Dragon bar. A demisol. So the person you're looking for is that boy. What's he doing in Lindbergh? How did he get here? Klein frowned, and as usual, his finger began to tap the table's edge. Tap 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 tap. From what little he knew, a demisol was not very mentally capable. Not because he was dumb, but because the boy was born half-monster. He saw things he wasn't supposed to see and heard things he wasn't supposed to hear. Even as a clown now, I don't feel I've surpassed the level of intuition that kid had. Only 2 people have figured out that I died and came back to life, and one of them is the Death Council. Rubbing his forehead a little, Klein's brow narrowed. A question echoed in his mind. Who was that man at the end of the dream? I've never seen him nor felt any sense of familiarity. A relative, but old Neil said that boy was an orphan and had no family, that he was looked after by the leader of the tavern. And that guy doesn't look anything like this one. Exerting his power over the mysterious space, the man's figure formed on the bronze table. Klein took the opportunity to look at it closely. Squinting, Another figure formed beside him, this one being that of the half-monster boy. Then another formed in the middle of them, this one being of the pair in the older man's coat-tails. Their features are similar, Klein murmured, seeing how the woman's nose and the older man's were identical. Nodding, Klein waved his hand slightly. Almost everyone in front of him disappeared, leaving only the boy Ademisal. Resting his cheek in his palm, the clown looked at the boy with a complicated look. It turned out that he was not an orphan, but quite possibly, his only remaining family had abandoned him after seeing his special condition. Klein had no idea what his story was, whether his parents died when he was very young or whether they only died in recent years. However, the evidence showed that the first possibility was the most likely. I'm careless of details, whatever his family history is, it's not something I should get into. But judging by the way the man looked, considering it some more, Klein closed his eyes and sighed. Finally, Ademisal's figure disappeared. Klein extended his arm without opening his eyes, his topaz pendulum glowing. It is safe to take this job. It is safe to take this job. Using semi-cogitation to empty his mind, he repeated 7 times silently. Opening his eyes, he saw the pendulum swinging at a medium speed clockwise. Judging the result and seeing that he was in the danger zone he was willing to tolerate, Klein decided to make one last divination. He would not hand over an innocent child to gangsters seeking to harm them. If they turned out to be a danger, he would pretend to accept their job and go to the police to report them. People who seek out the half-monster Ademisal are a danger to him. After repeating that sentence several times in his mind, Klein opened his eyes, already expecting a negative result. To his surprise, the pendulum was swinging clockwise at a good speed. Looks like I misjudged Grandpa. Relieved that he wasn't going to send a little lamb to the slaughter, Klein could only sigh as he simulated the sensation of falling. Returning to his body sitting on the toilet, the clown washed his hands and exited the bathroom, returning to the living room where the 2 men were still standing. They didn't even sit down. They must be in a hurry. I doubt I'm the only one who'll be offered the job of finding your boss's grandson. He gave a slight bow. Sorry, I'm late, gentlemen. I seem to have eaten something that upset me last night. No problem, I understand how that is, one of the men said as he nodded, empathy shining in his eyes. Klein changed the subject, not wanting to investigate further or learn more about a mobster's stomach problems. I'll take this assignment. I'll look for any information I can on this guy. Is there anything else I should know? Everything you need is on the paper I gave you, the more prominent man said as he pulled a small wad of notes from his pocket. Ads by PubFuture. Here are 18 SASM, 4 are for payment for the consultation, and 14 are for accepting the job. If you complete it and get us useful information, we will give you another 14 SASM, but if you manage to find the boy, we will give you 30 SASM. The sound of a teller rang in Klein's mind, immediately brightening the clown's mood. Smiling elegantly, the clown placed a hand on his chest and gave a small bow. I'll do my best. Straightening up, he added, I'll be using my contacts to speed things up. I should have news in a few days. Stop by again next Thursday. They both nodded. If everything is ready, then have a good day, Mr. Moriarty. We'll see you on Thursday. After dismissing the men from his house, Klein didn't rush off to find the boy. First, he packed everything he might need, including 3 packets of cards and a change of clothes. With the new method of sacrifice, it is possible that I can create talismans by praying to myself instead of the goddess. Considering how rare the space above the gray mist is, I wonder what charms I can create. Of course, for that, I would first need the ingredients for which I have no money as I have yet to look up the magician's formula, but I have not yet digested the clown potion. His mind wandered over all the problems before him, and Klein lamented the sheer number. If only I had the strength of Mr. Chariot, I could try to rob the gangs in this area. Though I doubt, I would do it in a way as luminous and vivid as yours. I'm not crazy. Shaking his head, Klein put the lunatic out of his mind. Thinking of his strength, his lips tightened slightly. In all this time since he had made the deal, he had yet to pray to the Scarlet Monarch. There doesn't seem to be any hurry, but I can't keep trying the patience of a true god. He did not fully know what intentions he had with him. But if he was to go by his blessed one's actions, they seemed at least to be good, and besides, it was quite possible that he knew what the space above the gray mist was. I finish this job and make contact. I'll see what he wants. ... Adjusting the simple bronze laurel on his head, Klein walked down the street momentarily before raising his hand and requesting a carriage. One that was pulled by a black horse was the one that picked him up. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked as he looked over his shoulder at the small window that connected him to his passenger. The window was not very big, it was even quite small, 25 centimeters by 15 centimeters, but it was big enough to talk to the passenger and small enough to provide privacy. Privacy was just what Klein needed. "I'll be giving you directions and where to turn. I hope you don't mind that," the clown said as he held out a 5 argentum note, the second highest value in Limburg. The driver grinned from ear to ear and quickly grabbed the note, hiding it in his waistcoat. "No problem at all, kind sir." Ignoring the pang he felt, Klein did not respond immediately but straightened his back, closed his eyes, and let his topaz pendulum dangle. Location of a demisol. Location of a demisol. After repeating the prayer 7 times, Klein felt his spirituality move, and without opening his eyes, he said, "To the right on this street, please." "Understood." Nodding at the words of such a kind gentleman, the driver pulled the horse's reins. The carriage began to move following Klein's directions, some straight, many turning right or left. Using divination, the clown guided the carriage to its goal. After a long moment, Klein lowered his arm. "This is it." Pulling on the reins and bringing the horses to a halt, the driver tapped on the window with his knuckle. "Have a nice day, sir." Klein, who was halfway down, raised an eyebrow in doubt, but his expression quivered a little as he saw where they were. Klein glanced at the building in front of him, immediately calculating how much money he had thrown away on his journey. It was a tall departmental building with exposed alcoves and vibrant yellow domes. A large sign in big yellow letters read, "Astok Quarter." This was one of the best places to live in the whole area. What could someone mentally deranged like a demisol be looking for here? Frowning, Klein stuffed a pocket in his trousers, making sure the letters were there and then moved on. Walking over to a vendor, Klein asked for his target. After getting an answer, he did the same with several, slowly moving away from the yellow building and taking more random routes. Someone as peculiar as the half-monster would no doubt make a scene no matter where he went. He would have to ask around and follow the trail. Ads by PubFuture. After a long while, Klein ended up in an alley. His brow furrowed into a frown, a layer of sweat clinging to his forehead, and his nose slightly wrinkled at the smell of dampness and rubbish in here. You can move a long way for such a skinny and possibly starving man. It had been several hours since he had started tracking the boy. The sun was slowly setting, and he had already left the Elysian district and entered the Nexus district. Despite his mental grumbling, Klein pulled out his pendulum and began to use it as a guide to find clues. It only took him 5 minutes to find an open trash bag, all sorts of contents littering the floor, but what caught the clown's attention was a perfect apple core on the floor. This one was completely out of place. Unlike the rottenness one would expect from something taken from the rubbish, this one was relatively fresh, as if the apple had just been plucked from the apple tree and eaten on the spot. Bending down, Klein took a closer look at the object. Traces of saliva were still on it, it had been eaten recently. Crack! The sound of glass being stepped on made his head whip around to the source of the noise. His brown eyes collided with panicked dark green eyes. At the other end of the alley, the figure of a demisol stood wearing a tattered and extremely dirty brown shirt and missing a shoe. How did I not notice him before? Surprised by the sudden appearance of his target, Klein controlled his body so as not to make any sudden movements. But before he could try to defuse the situation, a demisol sprinted to the opposite side, shouting, "No, no, no, no. They won't get me. Hey, wait." Getting up, Klein tried to chase after the young man, but his foot stepped on the apple core on the ground, causing him to stumble and fall face first to the ground. Klein raised his head in alarm, and his face was dirty with various filth. He couldn't believe what had just happened. A clown, someone supposed to have a ridiculous level of balance, had tripped. Not wanting to lose the young man, he quickly got up with a deft wave of his hand and began to chase after the boy. Was that a Beander power? That was too ridiculous to have been just luck. Gritting his teeth, Klein reached the end of the alley and looked both ways, searching for any sign of the young man. Finding him running the other way, Klein could only grit his teeth and sped up. Wait, I'm trying to help you. No, 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 what I'd give for a lasso now. Klein gritted his teeth, quickly dodging the people in the way. The boy's speed was nothing out of the ordinary, one could even say it was below average thanks to his current state, so the clown was already on his heels. Reaching almost the end of the pavement and about to cross the intersection, Klein reached out his hand with every intention of grabbing the young man's shirt collar. As soon as his fingers touched the soiled fabric, Klein's sense of danger was triggered, and he instinctively did a backflip. Watch out! Where he stood, a carriage sped past, crashing into the wall, and wood exploded all over the place. The owner who had shouted the warning came running over as well, visibly pale and alarmed. What the fuck was that? Klein thought ridiculously, this was already too much. If it wasn't for his clown powers, it would have seriously hurt him. All this movement attracted a lot of attention, several people coming over to see what had happened. Because of this, Klein was unable to continue his pursuit of the young man and was quickly on the verge of losing sight of him. "Ah no, I didn't spend 5 argentum to lose you like this." Gritting his teeth, Klein jumped a little high, managing to see over the people. It was only for a moment, but he could see the boy duck into a building that appeared to be under repair, through one of the open windows that closed as soon as he entered, trapping him inside. Gotcha. With new information, Klein did his best to get out of the crowd, but it still took him a few precious moments. As soon as he was free, he sped towards the building where a demisol entered, his eyes being drawn for a moment to the sign. Pausing a few paces away, Klein fixed his hair, which had become disheveled by the run, and rearranged his bronze laurel. Wiping the dust from his waistcoat and shirt, he could only sigh in relief that he had chosen to wear cheap clothes. If it was the 9 Sassam suit that fell into that filth, I was going to cry. His lips quivered slightly. With his appearance regained, Klein entered the building. There was a lot of movement, multiple blue collars were removing damaged tiles and replacing them with new ones. Others were repairing damage to walls or baseboards. Looks like they're doing a makeover. Klein looked at the scene curiously for a few moments before putting that aside as a person approached him. It was a man a little older than him, with his hair slicked back and his eyes sparkling. He wore good clothes and had a bronze bracelet running up his arm. This well-dressed man stood in front of him. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Assistant Eleanor. Welcome to Apex Financial Solution. Sorry for the noise, we are going through some remunerations. What can I help you with this afternoon?" Quickly stepping into his role, Klein gave a simple nod as he placed his hand on his chest. "Good afternoon, Mr. Eleanor. I'm Sherlock Moriarty, a private detective. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I was chasing a suspect who slipped through one of your windows. I would like your permission to investigate and catch him." Eleanor's expression was somewhat confused and alarmed. "Excuse me, you say someone has broken into the firm? It's a young boy who's been missing for several weeks. He's not dangerous, he's just scared, he won't hurt anyone. I need your permission to go into your basement to look for him and get him out." "Just that, then he won't bother you anymore," Klein said, looking around him. "I hope there's no other way out down there. It would be extremely embarrassing if they let me check, and it turns out he's not there anymore. Of course, if they let me, I can always come back at night and sneak in and get him." The assistant's face furrowed slightly. "Excuse me, Mr. Moriarty, but that's impossible. We keep important documents down there, and I can't let you in just because you asked me to." Normally, Klein would have been calm with that and walked out of the firm, but now he couldn't give up on so little. While he had no problem sneaking in at night, he hoped to avoid that as much as possible. With the kind of country Lindbergh was, any trouble that would bring him to the attention of the police had to be avoided. With that in mind, he decided to fight for the assistant's humanity. Frowning slightly, Klein looked at the man pleadingly. In a stuttering voice, he said, "Please, Mr. Eleanor, the boy is in serious condition. If you had seen him you would understand what I mean. His ribs are showing, and he is extremely dirty and disturbed. His grandfather, the only family he has left, is extremely worried. Since he disappeared 2 weeks ago, he has not stopped looking for him and has finally been forced to hire a detective to help him, and the police have not been able to find him. Please, I beg you, Mr. Eleanor, don't keep this family apart any longer." It's just..." Stumbling over his words, Eleanor took a stunned step back, a frown and intense mourning in his expression. After a few moments, the man gritted his teeth and let out a long sigh. Please wait here, I'll talk to the boss. He's the one who will decide if you can come in or not. Eleanor folded his hands. If he says no, I'm asking you to please drop this, Mr. Moriarty. Let him try is all I ask. Klein placed a hand on his chest and bowed deeply. The orderly looked at him briefly before turning and walking briskly towards the stairs. Squinting, Adrian paused his review of documents and looked up at the door to his office, already hearing someone coming up the stairs. After getting a little closer, he determined that the footsteps belonged to his assistant, which caught his attention. He was supposed to be supervising the repairs on the ground floor. It looks like something happened downstairs, Adrian murmured as he looked down at his papers and continued working, waiting for Eleanor to arrive. After a while and a knock on the door, a somewhat nervous assistant entered the office. Sorry to disturb you, Mr. Wayne, but there seems to be a problem downstairs. What is it? Adrian asked without looking up from what he was doing, paying close attention to the assistant. He looks pretty conflicted, like he's having trouble deciding something. Did the charity happen to ask for donations for the needy, and he's conflicted about whether he should give or not? After all, right now, we're the ones in need. Joking a little, he let the man speak. A detective came into the firm. He claims to have been chasing a missing young boy and that he came into our basement. He is requesting permission to enter to search for him. Eleanor explained what happened downstairs. A little sweat beaded his forehead from running up the stairs so fast. Feeling his throat suddenly dry, Adrian lowered the red fountain pen he had been using. Closing his eyes, he let out a deep sigh. It can't be, it's too early. Opening his eyes, Carbon Black looked deeply at Eleanor. What is the name of this detective? Sherlock Moriarty, Mr. Wayne. I understand. Looking down at his desk but not up at it, his gaze traversed several layers of concrete and steel until he reached the ground floor, where he stood. Badump. His heart raced a little, but Adrian quickly reigned over it and calmed it down. Sighing once more, he rose from his seat and walked over to Eleanor. Come on, I want to see if this great detective is telling the truth or lying. Of course, Mr. Wayne. Nodding at his boss's words, both men left the office. Before reaching the stairs, Adrian looked over the side of the banister to the ground floor. Between the blue collars, he could see him, and could barely hold back a cackle. Oh, baby, ha 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 ha, you say Leonard looks gay, but have you ever looked in a mirror? You look like you enjoy chewing on the pillow. Oh shit, you really do look like a black cat with those big eyes. He had always been amused by the comparison between the poor god and the felines, but he could understand it now face to face. It was like comparing two water drops, they were the same. Quickly averting his eyes before catching his attention, the black-haired man and his assistant went downstairs. Klein, already somewhat anxious for fear that a demisol would escape, was barely able to hold back a sigh of relief as Eleanor returned, but his relief was short-lived as he saw the man coming behind him. His pupils shrank, and the clown found himself speechless. His eyebrows touched his hair, and his mouth hung slightly. The scene he saw was completely surreal. There, standing behind Eleanor, walked someone he knew quite well. In fact, he had acted in one of his favorite films. Is that Christian Bale? Klein thought in complete disbelief, his brain short-circuiting a little. Watching the man's reaction, Adrian didn't hold back his mischievous grin at all. I thought you'd only see this face in newspapers, and I'd miss your reaction. I'm glad you recognize me. I wonder what your reaction will be like when you hear my name. You don't look like you have. Coming face to face, Adrian smiled and extended his hand towards him. Mr. Sherlock Moriarty, isn't it? I'm the owner of this firm, Harvey Wayne. It's a pleasure to meet you. Klein's already sparking brain flashed a blue screen. He stared blankly at the man in front of him. Barely able to contain his maniacal laughter, Adrian chuckles. Snapping out of his trance, Klein quickly squeezed the outstretched hand. It's a pleasure, Mr. Wayne. Still not believing what he was saying, the clown found it difficult to say the name. This was ridiculous. So there are cases like this on other worlds too. How bizarre. Klein held back the urge to swallow saliva and looked at the actor before him. I will assume Mr. Eleanor made you aware of my request. Ah, yes. He did, Adrian replied simply, nodding, his lips raising slightly. Waiting a few seconds for him to continue, but seeing that he did not, Klein could only suppress the annoyance slightly. Then you understand the severity of the situation. I hope it's possible You can go to the basement. I have no problem with that. But I'll have to accompany you. I can't let you wander down there alone. Adrian cut in, now smiling a little. Oh, thank you, Mr. Wayne. Klein gave a gentle nod, finding the request entirely reasonable. Mr. Wayne, I'll go with you. Eleanor inserted himself into the conversation as he eyed the detective suspiciously. He was uncomfortable with leaving his boss with a stranger down there. Don't worry, Eleanor, Mr. Moriarty is a good man. He won't do anything to me, you still have your work to complete here. Don't try to run away from it, yay. The black-haired man joked a little, but the assistant could only nod somewhat reluctantly. Giving him one last look, Eleanor returned to check that the workers were doing their jobs properly, leaving the two beyonders alone. Smiling at Klein, Adrian turned and looked over his shoulder. This way, Mr. Moriarty. This guy's kind of weird. The clown said nothing and just followed the man past the reception desk and into a hallway, which led them to a door. Opening it and revealing the dark stairs, Klein watched as the man began to walk down them without turning on the lights. He didn't mention anything but watched the man in amazement as they descended into the dark basement. He didn't turn on the lights to not alert my target that someone was coming in. That's some sharp sense. Also, he seems to have no problem with seeing in the dark. Is he a Beander too? Klein thought as he bit his molar twice and activated his spiritual vision. The man's aura revealed itself to him, and Klein noticed that the only colors were blue and orange. Calm and mischief. Before he could look any further, Harvey Wayne suddenly stopped and pulled something out of his pocket. Despite the dim light, he could see that it was a pocket watch. Why are we stopping? Did you see anything? Klein whispered, looking around but failing to notice anything. Harvey didn't respond immediately but turned the crown of the pocket watch to the right. Before he could question what he was doing, the man suddenly spoke. It's not very polite to look so deeply into people, you know. Especially if it's with your spiritual vision, you can see things you shouldn't. Freezing slightly, Klein instinctively tensed. I don't understand what you're talking about. No need to make excuses, Mr. Clown. I mean you no harm. I want to say hello. Wayne laughed in amusement as he turned around, his black eyes glinting slightly. Because he didn't seem to be in danger, Klein allowed himself to relax a little but kept his guard up. Excuse me, but I don't believe I know you. Oh, of course. Shaking his head slightly, the man laughed. Just a moment, let me introduce myself again. Contrary to what he was expected to do, Klein watched in confusion as the man unbuttoned a few buttons of his shirt in the chest area. Before he could question what he was doing, the man's face twisted unnaturally as if maggots were crawling under his skin. What the fuck? Startled, the clown watched in a daze as the man's appearance changed in seconds, and not only that, but grew taller several centimeters. While it was still a little hard to see, his eyes had already adjusted a little so he could see how the man's hair went from coal black to a fiery red that seemed to glow. His musculature grew quite a bit but also became more aesthetically pleasing. His waist shrank, and to his surprise, he saw his chest grow much larger, stretching his shirt almost to the point of tearing it even though he had unbuttoned several buttons. It took a moment but Klein immediately recognized the man in front of him, which made his eyes widen enormously. It's you. He tied his silky hair, which now reached his lower back, into a high ponytail with some loose sections framing his face and giving him a look both elegant and wild. His eyes were now a brilliant fiery scarlet that glowed in the dark. Smiling at the man before him, he gave an elegant bow. Please allow me to introduce myself again. I am Adrian Kenway. It is an honor to meet you. Short announcement. The new art of Adrian will drop in late August or early September. That will be the new cover of this book, hope you like it. A little spoiler, he looks juicy. Like Dammmmma Heathichka. Now you can understand why Flora loses her mind when our princess wants to play with her. This one will probably be the last piece for a while, maybe until volume 5. I have to consider whether I want more or not. Also, I plan to upload this story to AO3 as soon as I have the chance and more time. But I think I'll only do it at the end of this volume, so I have time to edit and post an error-free version. That's all. See you tomorrow. Klein regretted opening the door this morning, wishing he had just lain on the couch rotting and merging with it. If he had done that, he wouldn't be in such a complicated situation as this. Why, out of all the members I could meet first, it had to be this guy. Klein lamented his luck this day, which seemed to worsen by the second. Standing a few steps below him was the strongest member of the Tarot Club and the blessed of a true god, Mr. Chariot. I never thought I would meet another member in this way. I always thought it would be on a secret mission on some secret island, and by that time, I would have gotten stronger. Not meet this guy like this in the afternoon while chasing a kid like a hungover predator. No. It doesn't make sense. Why would a commission I just accepted this morning take me to meet Mr. Chariot? That's very strange. Noticing the problem and sensing that he could come up with something strange and dangerous, Klein was quick to go into semi-cogitation to empty his mind. It's all right, it's all right. Mr. Chariot is the blessed of the Scarlet Monarch, a true god. He must have several divine protections over him that I can't imagine. It is safe to be with him. Taking a better look at the man before him, Klein could not help but find himself at a loss for words. While the newspaper had provided a decent description of the man and a sketch of his appearance, he could tell with absolute certainty that the drawing looked like trash compared to the real thing. Fine features that looked like they had been drawn with an artist's brush, full lips, and captivating ruby eyes. With a body just as tasteful to match. The way the clothes fit him now, too tight for his liking, Klein felt like he was committing a sin just by looking at him, and his straightness trembled a little. No doubt he's a demigod, that face can't be human. And what about his body? It's too sensual. While he was very bitter at the thought of the latter, he couldn't deny it. Adrian Kenway not only had a good face and a great body but was also blessed with curves he could give away in installments. Klein could barely keep his eyes from falling to the man's chest. Perhaps he should consider wearing a bra for those mountains. That button is fighting for its life. PFF'd. Klein controlled his body as if he were controlling a puppet. He felt like a passenger behind the wheel of a car and was grateful for this, as he almost burst out laughing. Putting on a serious expression, he gave a slight bow with his hand on his chest and said in a somewhat cold voice, "It is an honor to meet you, Your Highness. The blessed of gods should be treated with the utmost respect. Why do you call me Highness? I'm not an angel yet, you know. Besides, if that were the case, I should call you Highness, too." Mr. Moriarty, Adrian provoked a little, smiling sideways. This guy, he immediately understood what he meant. He was giving his illusion as blessed of the fool because they shared the same status and rank. To his surprised relief, it seemed Adrian Kenway still remembered the order he had given not to say his name in vain. Of course, it no longer mattered at this point since everyone knew of the fool's existence. But the thought is what counts. It's like giving a gold medal to myself in a game that I created, judged, and participated in. Cursing internally, the clown decided to play along and not mention anything. Keeping his expression cold and serious, Klein nodded. "You're right, my mistake. I didn't expect to meet you in such a way. What brings you to Lindbergh, Mr. Kenway? And how long will it take you to leave?" Saying the last in his mind, Klein did not change his expression. Winking, Adrian said mysteriously, "You could say I'm here for the same reason you are." "I have no idea what you're talking about." Pretending to understand what he was saying, Klein nodded, "I see." Smiling, Adrian turned away, his face twisting again and his hair blackening and shortening. "Let's go find your target. Then we can talk more comfortably." Finishing saying that, the now black-haired man pressed the hangover time crown, and the noise capsule he had created by distorting space disappeared. Barely controlling his expression, Klein watched with trembling pupils as the man returned to his disguise and walked back down the stairs. Internally disappointed at that. Was this a test of some kind? What is the meaning of this, Mr. Chariot? Am I so much fun to annoy? You're annoying your lord's ally. I should throw a bolt of lightning at you for scaring me like this. Holding back all his annoyance and letting it express itself in his even colder gaze, Klein walked down the stairs following the man. He wasn't worried that his conversation had been overheard. He was confident that someone as careful as Mr. Chariot, someone who had evaded the search for the three churches with extreme ease, wouldn't let something like his conversation be overheard. Perhaps he made use of some power or artifact for that. Perhaps that pocket watch from before. It was very strange that only after he turned its crown did it decide to reveal itself. Which grade will it be, 3 or 2? Lampooning a little, the clown silently followed the man down into the basement. Just as he was about to try to communicate with signs to divide the search area, Klein was somewhat lost when he saw how Adrian kept walking straight ahead, not changing direction at any point and with purpose. Does he know where he is? How? Hurrying, the clown followed the black-haired man, looking around for any sign of where the boy might be. Ads by PubFuture. They walked silently, the control over his body helping Klein keep his steps quiet while the conspirator's movement was void of noise. The clown almost forgot he was there if it weren't for the fact that he was watching him. But no matter how hard he looked, he could only see shelves and shelves full of documents and dust, no sign of anything anywhere. Doesn't look like he's using any powers, heightened senses. Before Klein could continue imagining the man's abilities, Adrian raised his arm and stopped him. The taller man pointed a finger at a corner with an ordinary shelf. Understanding the message, the clown nodded and began to move stealthily to the ledge. He lowered his center of gravity by hunching slightly to prevent the accident from happening earlier. In movements not unlike a black cat in hunting mode, Klein glanced sideways at the black-haired man, and seeing him on the other side, he nodded. But contrary to his expectations, the man shook his head. He raised his right hand, and with boredom clear on his face, he clenched his fist. No sooner had he done that than there was a screech from behind the mantelpiece followed by a thud. A few seconds later, the clown watched with a flat face as a strangely frozen Ademisol was dragged out of his hiding place as if a ghost had grabbed him. His face was always facing away from them, his arms and legs were glued to his body, and he had become like a plank. Klein would have thought the guy was unconscious if it weren't for how big his eyes were and how they moved from side to side in alarm. Without changing his expression, he turned to watch as Adrian gave him an amused look. This is where we keep documents and other important items. Why would I make a mess chasing an intruder if I can do this? Thank you for your help. Klein placed his hand on his chest and gave a slight gentlemanly bow. That chariot had no trouble catching the boy who slipped past him several times didn't bother him much. It was a no-brainer. A starving, crazed child could do nothing against a demigod, no matter how lucky they were. The black-haired man nodded and looked at the boy he had tied up with his tripwires. Following an itch, he tapped his palm twice. The scenery became more vivid in his eyes, and the boy's aura manifested. His aura was a dense, turbulent, slightly transparent silver that was broken in several places and didn't seem to be able to function correctly. Turning off his spiritual vision, Adrian looked at the features of the boy, who was still staring around him in alarm and unable to move, and found him familiar. An eyebrow rose internally. The half-monster boy Ademisol. What is he doing here? Remembering a particular event in the original story and not wanting it to be repeated, Adrian pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and threw it at the boy's face. The handkerchief now covered his eyes, and he tied it with his threads in place. Klein looked at this in surprise. Does he know he's half monster? Is that why he covered his eyes so he couldn't see him? Ademisol looked at me once and wept blood. What if he looked at Mr. Chariot, a demigod? He will likely die. Mr. Chariot knew of this possibility, and he acted accordingly. Sighing, the clown could only be thankful that one of his problems had been easily solved. There was still the bigger one, though. Walking over to the boy, Klein carefully picked him up and placed him on his feet. The boy was still stiff. Seeing this, he gave the other man a look. You can let go now, Mr. Wayne. I've got him. Adrian rolled his shoulders and snapped his fingers. The strings that wrapped around the boy's legs surfaced, but only enough for him to walk. Running would be impossible. But even with what little mobility he had gained, he tried to break free and escape, but his attempts failed. Klein had a firm grip on his shoulder and would not let go, while the strings still wrapped around him made struggling impossible. With hangover time at hand, Adrian softened his gaze, smiled sweetly, and said softly, I meant you no harm. I want to help. Why don't we relax a bit? Yeah. You're safe now. Come on, breathe with me. Breathe in, breathe out. I didn't know Mr. Chariot had such a maternal side. Klein pursed his lips a little, finding himself a little uncomfortable all of a sudden as he, too, suddenly felt more comfortable. Watching the boy a little longer, the black-haired man considered enough and snapped his fingers. All remaining threads holding him back disappeared. As soon as Ademasal gained mobility again, he brought his hands to his head, clutching handfuls of hair and hunching over in a great hunch. In a broken, hoarse voice, he whispered, "Sorry, sorry, 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 sorry. You're like a mom," his companion commented, but the black-haired man just rolled his eyes. Sighing, he grabbed a chocolate bar from his shirt, opened it, and handed it to him, opening one of the young man's hands. "This is the only thing I have on hand, but it should do the trick of appeasing your hunger. Why don't you follow us? I promise I'll give you something tasty to eat." Klein looked at this, somewhat confused. Why was Chariot carrying a chocolate bar? Did he have a sweet tooth? Feeling the envelope in his hands, Ademasal mumbled nonsensically as he nodded and ate the sweet quickly. But the more he ate, the less he mumbled, and the more he focused on the candy in his hands rather than the voices in his head. Seeing that the boy was much calmer, Adrian turned to Klein. "Ads by PubFuture. Let's go to my office. I want to talk to the boy for a while." After leaving the basement and warning Eleanor that he would greet the detective and his captive, Adrian led the duo to his office on the 4th floor. Sitting back in his seat, the black-haired man looked at the young man sitting across from him, the clownish Klein sitting next to the boy. Resting his cheek in his palm, the black-haired man said, "Let's get things straight. I'm not mad at you. I want to know why you chose to break into my firm to hide." He noticed the problem with our meeting, too. Klein was slightly alarmed at the possibility that he wasn't as safe as he thought, but he kept his expression calm, observing the interaction calmly. This was the first time he had controlled his expression with such fervor. Without gray fog to protect him, he had to become a statue. Even with the blindfold over his eyes, Ademasal clenched his fists and began to tremble slightly. The young man bit his lips hard. "I had to run. Run. Not safe. Ali, not safe. They want to hurt me. Kill me." While Adrian was shocked by what he said, he did not stop his assault. "Who wants to hurt you?" The boy bit his lips even harder and lowered his head. "Them. The witches. The witches want to kill me." "What? But I didn't see anything in the divination about gray fog about this. Wasn't that grandfather what he thought he was? He was actually a woman using the shapeshifter ability." Alarmed, the clown felt a chill run down his spine and he couldn't help but stare at the man in front of him. There was no change in Adrian's expression, but Klein couldn't help but feel as if the man's gaze had sharpened. "Why do you think that? That the witches are after you?" "Ha ha. The voices, my dreams, they all tell me danger." They had never said the same thing before, always different. But not this time. "Ha ha. They all scream, 'Witches, witches, run away, run away, ha ha ha.' So I ran away. I jumped on a train when no one was." The young man muttered and guffawed helplessly, his trembling increasing. His voice dying and he just stared at the ground. "Is there anything the boy says that is familiar to you, Mr. Moriarty? I'm sure you didn't go to the trouble of looking for him without investigating him first." Adrian asked, looking at the detective who tensed for a second. Not expecting the question, Klein took a few seconds to answer. "No, this is the first I've heard of it," he said honestly. Something he didn't know about. Of course, Klein would never have taken the job if it was related to witches, something he can't deal with yet. Thinking about it for a moment, Adrian sighed and closed his eyes. It seems this was a product of his uncontrolled intuition, showing him the danger he was in a variety of ways. Flora broke into the conversation, though she was only heard by one of the three. Or it could also have been the hand of a certain author. But why him? Ademasal had nothing special about him in the original story, only functioning as a catalyst to warn Klein of the danger of the ritual and what it could cause without him knowing. Is this another change? Wanting to confirm his doubts, he turned his attention to the detective. If there was anyone who could tell him anything, it was him. "What can you tell me about the boy? His family, or if he has anyone? His history?" "I don't know much of his story, but I'll tell you what I know." Klein gave a polite little nod and continued, "His name is Ademasal and he lived in Tingen until a few weeks ago when he came here by train. He is half monster and is an orphan, but it is very likely that his grandfather is still alive and it was he who commissioned me to find him. It seems the situation is more complicated than I thought if Mr. Chariot is interested in who he is." "Ah, grandfather didn't exist before." Gently cupping his chin, the conspirator returned his attention to the bandaged child, who was still silent but rocking slowly. "Well, do you want to meet this strange man who claims to be your grandfather?" "No," Ademasal immediately answered, without a second's hesitation, continuing with wet rivers down his cheeks. "Not safe. Not safe. But here I am, here I am." Feeling a tingle on the back of his neck, Adrian followed his intuition and asked, "Why do you think you're safe now?" Stopping his wiggling, Ademasal whispered, "Safe, safe, safe," the voices say. In a slow but sure movement, the boy removed his blindfold and looked directly at the man in front of him, an unfamiliar swirl in the depths of his slightly blurred dark green eyes. "That I will be safe if I found the void," Ademasal said snappishly, clear, transparent rivers trickling down his cheeks. "Looks like you have another problem on your hands, princess," Flora said, amused, a giggle escaping her. Adrian just looked with no change of expression at the boy, his gaze curious, but his mind was already cursing his day. "I need a drink." Klein and Adrian looked stunned at what the boy had done, not expecting such a move. The clown had prepared to jump behind the chair in case Ademasal's body exploded from looking at a demigod, but contrary to what he expected to happen, the boy did not explode but continued to stare at the man in front of him. Adrian covered his face with his hand and sighed in exasperation. "Cover your eyes, boy, I don't want you to see something you shouldn't. Be thankful Hunter's Hallow works 24/7. Otherwise, I'd grab a spatula and separate you from the walls." Sighing again, Adrian turned to look at Klein with one eye closed. "I will pay whatever they promised you for handing over the boy. I think I'm going to keep him for a while." Whatever had brought the boy to him, he had to investigate. Leaving Ademasal like this could lead to future problems he'd rather avoid. The detective looked deeply at the man in front of him, debating whether to tell the actual amount or add a few more coins and zeros. But in the end, Klein decided to go with the truth. "They offered me 14 sasam for any information I could find, along with another 30 if I gave them Ademasal. Who was crazy enough to cheat a demigod by having him face to face? I would have said more if we were in the space above the gray mist. If he found me out and pissed him off, I could expel him without any problem. Of course, then I'd have to deal with him in the real world. How complicated." Klein gave a little mumble. Nodding, the black-haired man returned his attention to the boy. "Well, Ademasal, what do you say?" "Yes. Ha, yes." A strange smile formed on the boy's face, an expression dancing between delusion and peculiar happiness. "Maybe I should call you Princess Tomato, mistress of the cats. With so many strays you pick up on the loose, it already looks like you're creating a caretaker." Flora joked, and the redhead felt his lips quiver. He had a neighbor who was the definition of cat crazy. The smell of urine was strong, and her little demons were constantly fighting on his roof in the early hours of the morning. Not wanting to recall annoying experiences, the black-haired man looked at the boy's body. "He's quite thin but not in a dangerous state. With Opera's diet, he should gain weight fast and be ready to take the potion." Sigh. "Looks like I'll have to talk to a certain diabetic snake." Knowing what his night would be like, Adrian lowered his hand and straightened up. Pulling his wallet out of his pocket, he grabbed several 10 sasam notes and handed it to Klein without counting if it was the right amount. "Here for all your trouble, Mr. Moriarty. I hope this makes up for the trouble you went through." Taking the notes, Klein couldn't help but notice how fat the man's wallet was compared to his thin one. There must be at least 1,000 sasam in there. As he thought that somewhat dazedly, he diligently counted the base in his hands and could only press his lips together. In total, in his hands, he now had 150 sasam. "Hey, do you have enough money to just throw it away? Are you that rich?" Complaining at the social difference, Klein separated the extra notes and held them out to the man. "You gave me extra." "I didn't. Like I said, that's for your trouble, it's all yours." Adrian raised his hand and shook it disinterestedly. Klein looked at him for 3 seconds before nodding and gathering the notes in his pocket. Maybe Chariot wasn't as bad as he thought. Rising from his seat, the clown gracefully bowed. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Wayne. I have things to do, so I will be retiring." Smiling, Adrian also rose and stood in front of the detective, extending his hand. "It was a pleasure to see you, Mr. Moriarty. Please, if you have any questions or need assistance, the doors of my firm will be open. Please don't pay attention to the name, though, I plan to change it soon. Only if my life depends on it." Adding in his heart, Klein reluctantly grasped the outstretched hand and squeezed it. But before he could withdraw it, Adrian pulled him to him, and, bringing his lips to his ear, he whispered, "My lord wishes to speak with you tonight. It will be at 10 p.m. Ignoring the shiver he had just felt from the breath in his ear, Klein gave a subtle nod, and with that, he was released. Looking at the man before him, Klein raised his hands to his torso and opened them as if reading a book. "May knowledge be with you, Mr. Wayne." This was the prayer posture of the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Smiling, Adrian made the same gesture. "May knowledge be with you too, Mr. Moriarty. I hope to see you soon." Handing the boy a blank book and a pencil to keep him busy, the black-haired man did not return to his seat but sat down next to the young man, who soon began to write and draw. Adrian wrote a letter and put it in an envelope with the initials O in a chocolate bar. He pulled his bell out of its hiding place and rang it. The second he rang it, he covered Ademisol's ears with his hands and eyes with a handkerchief. "Mr. Wayne, it's all right, it'll pass soon." The boy looked confused at this but shivered as he felt the temperature drop and froze, his eyes on the ground. The next second, the temperature returned to normal as if it had never dropped. "Good job." Whispering softly to the boy, Adrian patted his head soothingly. As a reward, he handed him another sweet, which he accepted somewhat. The black-haired man let the boy eat in peace and returned to his desk where a lone letter rested. Unlike the previous one, this one had the initials BS written in beautiful calligraphy. "Looks like Miss Casper finally found a party." Feeling his mood brightens a little, Adrian grabbed the letter and opened it. "Less than greater than, underscore, Mr. W underscore, a Beander gathering will be held on the 7th of September. I will take you there with Marich. Sincerely, Sharon." Less than greater than, short and to the point, like the writer. He laughed under his breath a little. Nodding in satisfaction, Adrian crumpled the letter into the smallest ball he could make and clenched it in his fist. He tossed it into the metal trash can behind his desk. As soon as it hit the bottom, it burst into flames and turned to ash. Turning to look at the boy who was now scribbling, he patted his shoulder to get his attention. "We're going to visit a friend of mine. Don't worry, she's a sweetheart." Ademisol nodded somewhat awkwardly, his gaze lost. "Yes, sir." Seizing the opportunity, Adrian glanced at what the boy drew in the book. There were multiple meaningless scribbles and drawings of various things in the office in it. The only words he could recognize from the mental mess conveyed in the book were Adamus. Shaking his head, Adrian simply sighed, grabbed the changes of clothes he had hidden in the ceiling, and handed them to the young man. After giving him some privacy to change and arranging the details they were missing, both men left the firm. Ademisol left in a hooded shirt that hid his face. They took a private carriage bound for the workplace of a certain planter. While the place where she worked was not very far, and they could have gone on foot, Adrian preferred to take this more discreet route. His companion was wanted in a certain way, so he couldn't just walk outside. If someone looking for the boy saw them, it would create a lot of unnecessary trouble. Besides, I'd rather avoid having to kill while I'm in Lindbergh. I don't want the church to think I'm a psychopath with an unquenchable bloodlust. Adrian sighed, regretting his situation a little. A while later, Artelia district. After getting out of the carriage and making sure the boy's hood was in place, Adrian looked at the building in front of him. It was a lovely flower shop, with large windows that encapsulated the red wooden door. These windows revealed the plants inside, ranging from various flowers to other rarer plants he couldn't recognize. The building was painted a soft pink color. The sign hanging above the door said, "Flowy House." One of his team members worked at this place. He could only praise her for choosing such a good place. This place functions not only as a flower shop but as a traditional planter's and nursery. A perfect place for a planter to perform. Tying one of his strings around the boy's waist so he wouldn't stray too far, they both entered the flower shop. Chin chin, a small bell rang, and a voice sounded from the back of the shop. Just a moment, hearing the familiar female voice, the man smiled and tugged his hand a little, stopping Ademisol from biting out of a sunflower. "That'll give you an upset stomach," the black-haired man said without looking at the young man, who lowered his head in disappointment. "It looked tasty," he muttered. Ignoring the young man, Adrian watched as a black-haired, blood-red-eyed woman walked up to them with a small smile. She wore a green tunic dress with a window on her right leg. Her heels trailed in fabric up her legs, hugging the white skin. "Good evening, gentlemen. How may I help you?" the woman asked, her eyes sparkling. It was part of the code and act they had agreed to perform before they parted. "Excellent evening, beautiful lady. I am looking for a particular flower. If I remember correctly, it was called blue lily. It has a unique appearance and supposed healing properties. I was wondering if you sold it here." The planter smiled elegantly and raised a hand pointing to her back. "Of course. It is one of our most delicate flowers, so we keep it at the back of the shop. If you could come with me, I'd happily show it to you." Adrian nodded and, using his thread as a leash, dragged a demisol along with him. The planter took the opportunity to close the shop door and put the sign on closed. That done, she wasted no time in following the duo at a brisk pace. Crossing the door that separated the shop from the rest of the house, she closed it as well. Now in privacy, the woman turned around, smiling happily as she gave a slight bow. "It's good to see you back. Is this the boy?" the planter opera greeted happily. "Nice to see you too." Smiling, Adrian placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "And yes, this is him. The letter he sent earlier was to let her know he was coming to visit and to prepare to receive him." "Where is Mr. Dree?" the black-haired man asked curiously. He couldn't hear anyone else in the building, and the man of 40 was quite loud and the owner of this flower shop planter pharmacy. "Mr. Asger left a while ago. I'm in charge of closing the shop, so it's just us," Opera replied, turning her attention to the boy standing next to her boss and dear friend. Crouching down slightly until she was face to face with the boy, a soft expression on her face. "Hey, what's your name, young man?" "Mine's Penelope. It's a pleasure to meet you." While her boss had already told her the name on the letter, she decided to feign ignorance and introduce herself to the boy. Looking at the young lady, the half-monster watched her blankly before lowering it and muttering, "A demisol. A bit shy, aren't you?" the woman asked, straightening up, and Adrian snorted. "You have no idea." Shaking his head, he continued, "Are you sure you'll be able to care for him? He might do weird things, and it will take me a few days to get all the ingredients." Opera waved her hand calmly. "It's no problem. I'll have Jerry to help me calm him down if he gets too weird. Besides, it's only a few days. I can do it. And you've just damned yourself." Sighing, the red-haired man patted the woman's shoulder sympathetically. "Don't provoke fate. Yeah, she's a lady with a very short fuse and a horrible temper." "What do you mean?" Opera raised an eyebrow, confused about what her friend was referring to. The man didn't answer, only turned to look at a demisol, an action that the planter mimicked. "Ha ha, short fuse." The young half-monster laughed oddly, his face twisted into a smirk. Quote. At that moment, Opera reconsidered whether it had been a good idea to accept her boss's favor. After leaving a demisol with Opera and having a short talk about what to expect and what to do if the boy started acting strange, Adrian didn't stay much longer in the flower shop and returned to his apartment in Astoke Quarter. After locking the door and confirming that no one had entered while he was away, he entered his office and formed a wall of spirituality, sealing the room. That done, he took his place in his chair. Reaching under the desk, the shadows on it bubbled briefly before spitting a thin, dark metal watch into his hand. Opening hangover time and confirming that he still had about 40 minutes before the time he had told Klein, he wasted no time making an altar to remove the origami from his calamity wardrobe. With the figurine now on his desk and having cleaned the altar, Adrian unfolded the origami and wrote with a pencil of paper with extreme delicacy. If he has not yet reincarnated, then he must still be a child. If his parents are decent, then he should be sleeping at this hour, the black-haired man thought calmly as he carefully folded the paper and the origami bird returned to its form. "At least this is fun. It reminds me of my crafts." With that in mind, Adrian leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. Using cogitation, it only took him a few moments to fall into the dream world. Opening his eyes, his lucidity returned immediately, and the scenery changed to the metric world of Upside Down and Twisted, with the black steeple with a huge silver snake who, this time, was awake and looking down at him from her place on the ceiling. Ignoring the stare, Adrian looked down at his body, noting that he was still in the Harvey Wayne costume. He just shook his head and walked to the spot. No sooner had he taken the third step than he was in front of it but did not enter. He looked up and gave the menacing snake a small smile. Extending his left palm into the air, he wiggled his fingers like a spider. "What do you say? A little petting. It's been a while since we've seen each other. You owe me that, don't you think?" The snake, easily bigger than the house, looked at him for a few seconds before descending on him. Closing its red eyes, the snake brought its nose closer, and the red-haired man wasted no time nuzzling it. There, you're a good boy." Laughing softly, Adrian petted the snake, which, after a few seconds, separated from the man but not before licking his palm with his tongue. Laughing some more and without further interruptions, he entered the building. Walking in no apparent direction and darting through doors, walls, and staircases, he returned to the curious blue-walled room. A blonde-haired, black-eyed boy with a slightly confused look was waiting for him. Normally, people who visit this place are a little afraid of it. "Do you like snakes, Mr. Kenway?" "Why would I be afraid of you?" Adrian asked, amused with a raised eyebrow, walking up to the mercury snake and ruffling his hair. "Did you think I'd really believe that snake was just your pet? Conceited child." Will Osepton, the Archangel of Sequence 1, the Serpent of Destiny, looked somewhat stunned at the man before him. "You have grown bolder, Mr. Kenway." Grinning sharply, Adrian stopped ruffling and held the boy's head, his eyes glinting dangerously. "Be thankful that this is the only thing I'll do to you for leaving me without saying anything." Before the boy could say anything, he lowered his hand from the boy's head to his cheek, which he squeezed somewhat tightly with 2 fingers. "Ow!" Squeezing his cheek, not expecting such boldness, Will stared dumbfounded at the man who gave him a tetric smile. "Don't do that again, and your cheeks won't be the only thing I'm going to twist." That was a move he had learned from his grandmother, who always used it when he misbehaved or didn't want to eat his vegetables. Using the move passed down from generation to generation, he punished this naughty boy. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Sigh. Rubbing his cheek a little, Will just gave a nod. "That's on me, I deserved it." "You've seriously gotten bolder, Mr. Kenway." "Not bolder but sterner. Do you want me to treat you like a child?" "I'll treat you like one," Adrian said flatly, crossing his arms and giving the boy a look worthy of a disappointed father. One of the blonde eyebrows twitched. "I'm glad you're so considerate. You know, Mr. Kenway, I always thought of you as bold. But that move you made, I must say, I never expected you to be capable of something like that. Everybody's looking for you now. Are you sure you can handle that load? If they want me, let them come for me. I'll kill them like the last bastards who tried it," Adrian said in a cold voice, drawing a childish chuckle from the boy. "How bloodthirsty." Rolling his eyes, the black-haired man sighed and lowered his arms. "I need the monster and robot potion formulas. I have a kid who is half monster, and I want him on my team. I need the formula to fix his mental problems." "You don't know when to stop, do you? It's too late for a kid to be awake." Will grumbled a little, pouting. But Adrian didn't care, already knowing how to deal with it. "I'll buy you 6 pounds of ice cream if you give it to me." The boy's eyes lit up as if 2 stars were suddenly born deep inside them. Without holding back his happiness, the boy pointed a finger and a huge smile at the man. "Make them vanilla, and you've got a deal." Done. Sighing with satisfaction that the problem with Ademisol was solved, Adrian wasn't done yet. "In a few days, I'll have a mission." The cheerful expression on Will's face immediately soured, and the boy puffed out his cheeks. And his eyes became watery. Why do adults always have to ruin the good things? This is child exploitation. "I'll include chocolate in the ice cream." "What did you say you needed?" As if pressing a button, his bright smile and starry eyes returned. Knowing that this was for the snake's mental health and that he had annoyed him enough, the comparator could only sigh. "On the 30th of August, I have a mission with some investors. I thought you might be interested to know." A thoughtful expression replaced the smile. With a finger under his chin, Will looked curiously at the ceiling. "What time would that be?" "I would meet them at 7:30 p.m. Tilting his head, the Mercury Serpent asked a question every 10-year-old would ask. Why? Knowing he only wanted to tease him thanks to his very coarse experience taking care of his younger cousins, Adrian specified further. "I thought you could give me a better look at this." Will smiled mysteriously. "Have you forgotten that your destiny is hidden? No matter how much I want to, I can't get a peek like you say. Returning the smile as he noticed the problem, Adrian laughed softly and said, "You never said you didn't know anything." Ads by PubFuture. The boy's smile faltered, and he could only sigh in exasperation. "You got me." Raising his hands in surrender, the snake looked at him in boredom. "That day is when the gates of the tower will be opened. The time you said is half an hour before it begins. Surely those who invited you want you to participate." His heart began to pound, and a feral smile formed. Finally, he could see one of the biggest changes to the original story. Controlling himself, Adrian didn't forget about his cancelled mission with the snake and inquired about it. "By the way, what happened to that mission on the 14th? Was there a problem, or was it moved?" "Something like that." Will clasped his hands behind his back and started looking at his feet. "The mission was just to get you into the tower. But now that someone else will do that for me, I don't have to worry about it." "Don't get your hopes up. That doesn't change that you have a mission." Straightening his back, Adrian looked thoughtfully at the boy. Will, with a serious voice and an expression that shouldn't be in such a young boy's, said, "Your primary mission is to climb the tower and reach the top." Returning to his body and opening his eyes, Adrian growled something hoarse. Bringing a hand to his face, the black-haired man sighed. Taking a few seconds, he turned to look at the pocket watch still open on his desk. Seeing that only 20 minutes remained, the conspirator did not hurry but calmly made another altar and sacrificed the origami bird to himself. That done, he went into his room, threw himself on his bed, and covered himself with his blanket. The clock now showed 4 minutes to 10 p.m. Adrian closed his eyes, the sphere of light already forming in his mind. Opening his eyes to the familiar yellowish landscape with the familiar city in the distance, he just stood up and stretched a little. He had to prepare the welcome for a certain clown. First impressions are the most important thing, after all. Adrian laughed darkly, beautiful dark armor covering his body and a hood obscuring his face. Pitado Street, Unit 1 to 5. While Klein knew this moment would come sooner rather than later, he found it difficult to keep his hands from shaking. Clenching his fists, the clown let out a shaky sigh and closed his eyes. He didn't need to ask about the honorific name. Adrian Kenway had taken it upon himself to spread it worldwide and told him so in their private chat at the Grey Fog. Clasping his hands together, Klein prayed in Hermes. The scarlet monarch who burns depravity. The calamity forgotten by time. The stranger that comes from the unknown. As soon as he finished saying that, Klein felt something deep inside him being pulled. Before he could react, orange flames blinded his vision. Somewhat dazed, the clown blinked. His vision had changed from his room to a yellowish smoky wasteland. All he could see was that. This place is like the space above the Grey Fog. Klein was speechless, finding the place enormously familiar. But no matter where he looked, he couldn't find it. "Good afternoon, or should I say good night?" A sudden voice beside him made him freeze. Controlling his body not to startle, he turned and looked to his side. There, where there was nothing before, stood someone. Wearing a papal red tunic with the hood raised, Klein could see an armor of black and bloody rusty metal beneath it. An intangible pressure emerged from his body that seemed to bend and burn the space. Pressure that made Klein want to kneel and surrender to such a behemoth. Klein immediately realized who he was. The Scarlet Monarch. The clown's pupils shrank, and he prostrated in front of the figure, his forehead touching the ground and sweating bullets. Klein bit his lips hard, but before he could sink deeper into his fear and nervousness, a soft chuckle reached his ears. Klein did not dare look up lest he offend the god, so he stayed still. A statue moved further. "Please rise, such formalities are unnecessary," a softer, deep voice said, and biting his lips a little, the clown slowly looked up. From what little he could see of his uncovered face, an amused smile was clear. The figure smiled calmly. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Moretti. Of course, you know who I am." Not at all comfortable with his true identity being discovered by such an existence with ulterior motives, Klein could only hide his discomfort as best he could and slowly stand up. "It is an honor and a blessing to meet you, Scarlet Monarch," he said with reverence and enormous respect. While he didn't entirely trust the existence before him, the truth was that his blessed had helped save Tingen, which earned an opportunity in his books. Though in this case, I seem to have earned the opportunity. Holding back his lips from trembling, Klein deepened his bow a little more. Even if existence had said it was all right, not showing at least some respect was to court death. A soft, soul-caressing chuckle calmed the clown's nerves, and he still didn't calm down. You can look at me. I give you my word that nothing will happen to you. I mean no offense, monarch. Klein tried to refuse the offer as cordially as possible, but the god seemed to want none of it. Don't worry, it's fine. Cursing inwardly, the clown finally relented and slowly looked up with extreme care and movements not unlike those of a wary cat. The shadow-covered face and hood returned to him, and the clown flustered again. For what reasons do you wish to speak with me, Lord? The hooded figure smiled mysteriously. Isn't it obvious? Obviously to reward the hero who sacrificed himself to save Tingen. Of course. Reward. Klein found himself dazed and confused. This must have shown on his face, for the Scarlet Monarch was quick to add. You almost single-handedly prevented the true creator from descending, sacrificing your life in the process. If those efforts were not rewarded, it would be a failure on my part. Single-handedly, Klein murmured faintly, his mind flashing past the faces of the people who fought alongside him. Daly Simone, Leonard Mitchell, and Dunn Smith. Remembering the lonely grave in the flower-covered cemetery, the clown could only lower his head. No, I didn't do it alone. I had a lot of help. And despite Mr. Kenway's help, I failed to protect everyone and the captain. A soft sigh sounded at his side, and Klein only lowered his head further. Of course, why would a higher existence care about the death of human beings? Pat pat, ah. Unable to stop himself from tensing, Klein let the armor-covered hand gently stroke his head. While he could not see his face, he could feel the deep sadness and empathy from the monarch's gaze. Of course, it was my mistake. Dunn Smith died as a hero, and his sacrifice must never be forgotten or belittled. While that is so, please, Klein Moretti, don't forget that you too gave your life for the ones you loved. Though you got back up, you lost everything. I'm sure it hurts. It stabs your heart. You wonder why you got back on your feet and not him. Right. Drop, drop. Klein said nothing. Clear, turbulent rivers streamed down his face, the pain he'd been keeping all this time behind a mask finally coming out, the dam breaking. We don't choose our destiny. No matter how much we want it, we are all given a responsibility that often crushes and suffocates us. That's what you have now, Klein. There is no gentle way to put it. You have a huge responsibility on you. One that was given to you against your will. Whether you want to carry it or not, that's entirely your choice. I will only give you the tools so that the path you choose will be easier for you to see. More, please, no matter what happens, never forget why you do it. Why do you get out of bed and face a new day? That's what makes us human, the people we fight against dangers and madness for. A tense nod was all Klein gave, his body shaking hard and light sobs leaving his tight lips. While he wanted to stop, he thought that being like this in front of a god was a great offense and that he had to regain control. He was incapable of that. Once the doors were opened, they would not close until all that was sealed behind them came out. Sob, sob. The Scarlet Monarch said nothing more. He just stroked his head calmly, letting him unburden all the pain he had hidden behind a red smile and white face. Between the tears and sobs, Klein could barely hear something break, and something inside him melted completely. It took him 20 minutes to regain his composure, and when he did, he could only stand there with a red face. Even more so if he felt embarrassed enough to die, Klein couldn't deny that he hadn't felt this good in days. Even weeks. Better, the Scarlet Monarch asked with a gentle smile that reminded him very much of a father to his son. Why yes, thank you very much, Lord. The detective stuttered a little. Still red. Hee. It's nothing. Remember that having that inside you for so long is unhealthy. It can lead to losing control if you're not careful. The monarch joked a little. I'll keep that in mind. The monarch nodded in satisfaction. He then looked around and could only sigh. Our time is getting short, so I must make this quick. I will now give you the formulas for sequence 7 through 5 of your pathway. Try to write them down once you get back to your body. Stunned, Klein could only nod with his heart pounding. Sequence 7 Magician. Main ingredients. 1 true root of a mist treant, all the spinal fluid of a dark patterned black panther. Sequence 6 Faceless. Main ingredients. A mutated pituitary gland of a thousand-faced hunter, a characteristic of a human-skinned shadow. Sequence 5 Marionettist. Main ingredients: dust of ancient wraiths, core crystal of a six-winged gargoyle. Finishing dictating the formulas, the monarch chuckled softly under his breath. If you have trouble remembering them, you can always pray to me. Considering you are a seer, it shouldn't be a problem. Quote. Thank you very much, Lord. Klein gave a deep bow in respect. His fear about this existence had been almost completely extinguished, leaving only that which accompanied his now great respect for this one. He had never expected the Scarlet Monarch to be one so gracious and gentle. The Scarlet Monarch gave a slight nod. In closing, this is the last thing I will tell you. You are not alone, Klein Moretti. The detective pursed his lips slightly, suddenly finding himself a little uncomfortable. While he appreciated what the monarch had done for him, this was already encroaching too much on his personal space. Maybe it's a lonely existence. And want some friends. I appreciate your words, Lord. But I think I'm misunderstanding. A mysterious smile formed on the Scarlet Monarch's face. Let me rephrase myself. I speak to you, the person who comes from another world and inhabits the body of Klein Moretti. Klein's heart stopped, and he turned pale as a leaf. He knows. Without giving him time to defend himself, the monarch continued. At this moment, there is someone like you walking the world. The clown brain blue screened for a second, his mouth hanging and ultimately lost for words. Use that information as you will. Have a good night, the monarch said, turning around and walking into the yellowish smoke, slowly disappearing into it. Wait, what do you mean there's someone else like me out there? Klein reached out his hand, but an orange flame blinded his vision. Thump, erg. Grunting in pain at the strong hit, the clown opened his eyes and saw that he was lying on the ground in his study at home. Klein didn't get up, just stared at the ceiling with a blank stare. There's someone like me walking the world, he murmured barely above a sigh. He understood the message the Scarlet Monarch had conveyed. Out there is another transmigrator. Klein mumbled, still not believing what he had heard. At this moment, Klein finally found the thing that the god and his blessed one shared. Both of them always saved the most important information for last. It took him a few long minutes to get up from the floor, suddenly finding it quite comfortable. Taking a seat in his chair, his hand had already moved, and he began to tap the edge of his desk a little. After a while, Klein made a simple divination and wrote the formulas for magician, faceless, and marionettist on paper. That done, he stared at the potion formulas with a blank expression. All his worries about obtaining the formulas had been resolved, but now new and far more troubling concerns occurred. The Scarlet Monarch is aware of my status as a transmigrator, the detective thought as he patted his back. While that information terrified him and made him extremely nervous, the latest information revealed by the god took everything out of him. At this moment, there is someone like you walking the world. Repeating his words, Klein pursed his lips. The god's words gave birth to two possibilities, familiar and unfamiliar. Honestly, Klein didn't know which one to choose as the right one because they were both too good. Not only did he use is but also added, at this moment. No one has seen Russell in over 100 years, but he is likely still alive. If the monarch is referring to him, it would simply confirm that he is still alive. Knowing that Emperor Russell was alive, a fellow countryman, warmed and tightened the detective's heart. If this possibility was correct, as usual, it raised more doubts. What had happened to him? Why didn't he reappear if he was supposed to be alive? What is his condition? Did he manage to find the way back to Earth? Knowing that he would only cause himself a giant headache if he thought about it more and adding that he still lacked many contexts, the clown decided to leave the state of the great Emperor of Intis to his future self. Now, only the second possibility remained. A transmigrator is moving at the same time as me. I am not alone. Klein frowned slightly. While he had considered this fact some time ago, he had not expected confirmation to come in such a form. Is he also a friend from home? So far, the only other transmigrator I know is from China, counting me, there are two. I have no idea where the transmigrator before Russell came from. Maybe I'll get some clue in the Emperor's diary, but for now, it's safest to assume they're from another country. With that in mind, the chances of this transmigrator being from China is quite high. 75/25. But that doesn't mean I have to believe they're from China. Yes, even if they're not from there, we come from the same planet, so we'd still be fellow countrymen. Klein couldn't help but smile a little, a warm feeling in his chest as he thought about it. A question formed in his mind. Were they a normal person or a Beander? Biting his lip, his finger once again tapped the table. If they were a normal person, he would have to protect them. I acquired Beander powers due to the specialness and strangeness of my death that was investigated by the Nighthawks. Is it possible that this new friend from home is similar? If they still are a normal person, then how do I find them? I don't have the strength or resources to go around the world asking anyone who crosses me if they know what Bluetooth is. Gritting his teeth, Klein could only grunt in frustration. So close but so far. Single quote. Wait. Rising abruptly from his chair, knocking it over, Klein looked straight ahead with an enlightened gaze. Why do I assume that person is normal? All the people who transmigrated, in one way or another, have gone far and left their mark on the world. Emperor Russell, with his scientific breakthroughs, brought about the Industrial Revolution. The mysterious transmigrator who made a tower somewhere in the world that even the Emperor himself finds frustrating. Even he, Klein Moretti, is making his own mark on the world. Acting as an old god and stopping the descent of an evil god. No transmigrated person was normal. That means that it is very likely that this one is also making their mark on the world. If they are like me or the Emperor, they will likely do something to prove their status as travelers. All he had to do now was to look for that, the mark they were leaving. It could be in the form of a modern idea brought here, as in Russell's case, or something more discreet, like what he was doing with his name, Sherlock Moriarty. Klein's smile froze, and his expression tensed. A fleeting thought crossed his mind, raising his eyebrows second by second. He had already met someone like this. Feeling his legs losing strength, Klein leaned back against his desk. No, it's impossible, the man muttered in denial. The name formed in his mind again, and the detective found himself grabbing his hair, stretching it with such force that he was sure some were pulled out, but even that didn't stop his mind. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense, which made the clown even more understandable. Not only was his name already ridiculous, but his appearance was identical to the actor's. There's no way it's just a coincidence. Thud, his head lay against the table, already surrendering to the grim truth he could no longer ignore. No matter how I look at it, Adrian Kenway is the transmigrator. That's why the Scarlet Monarch was smiling. Lamenting, Klein raised his chair dejectedly and slumped into it like a sack of potatoes. Like God, like blessed. Tap, tap, patting his cheeks, Klein frowned and let out a shaky sigh. This is good, this is good. Mr. Chariot is already strong. Maybe if I ask him, he'll be willing to take care of me. We're both from the same world. We're practically brothers. But why didn't he contact me when he read my name? Sherlock Moriarty must have caught his eye. Even if he's not someone who reads books, at least the name should have been enough to get his attention and get him to investigate. Finding a problem, the detective frowned. Or maybe he was expecting me to make contact first. Are you aware that the detective who visited you today is also a transmigrator? It would be too ridiculous for someone like Mr. Chariot not to have noticed the signal, so it's very likely he has other reasons for not making contact. Or maybe it's not safe to talk about our home. He just gave the crumbs to signal that he was from the same place but didn't say anything to avoid attracting the attraction of something, or maybe alerting someone. I don't know how a demigod thinks, but this is enough to make me tread carefully. I have no idea if the Scarlet Monarch told him that, but considering he isn't afraid to withhold information from his blessed one, he would have to slowly approach the man and give clues to his condition. Perhaps then he might know a little more and be able to ask for his help. After all, finding a way home will be much quicker if we work together. Maybe the Scarlet Monarch would help them with that, or perhaps even make trouble. But Klein couldn't do anything about that now, so he could only shut his mouth and eat his cake. I can't contact him in the physical world. That might draw the attention of whoever Chariot wants to avoid. It has to be somewhere else, like the space where the Scarlet Monarch dwells or the space above the gray fog. If I want to talk to him, then I can simply ask the Scarlet Monarch to arrange a meeting. But I prefer it to be somewhere where I control the media. The ability to create a Smurf account had just taken top priority. I already have a good knowledge of mirror divination. Maybe it'll work now, I felt like I came close last time. But if it fails, I'll have no choice but to try it when I advance to sequence 7. Trying to cheer himself up more, he tried to look on the bright side. The clown potion has been digested. Now I have to find the ingredients for magician to test my theory. Clutching the paper with the formulas, the clown couldn't help but purse his lips a little. He preferred the name Shapeshifter to Faceless. Ads by PubFuture. On the outskirts of a city covered with yellowish smoke, the figure in the papal red robe looked at the place where Klein Moretti had been. The Scarlet Monarch, no longer able to stand it, began to tremble visibly and burst out laughing. Ha 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 ha. Falling backward onto the yellowish ground, the papal robe and armor covering his body faded to a simple white shirt and black trousers. Ha 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 ha. Adrian Kenway laughed, unable to stop himself. Clear streams trickled down his cheeks. Huff 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 huff. Finally calming down, the red-haired man sighed contentedly as he looked up at the yellow sky from where he lay. Oh, dear Klein. You have my respect. I don't know how you can do this every Monday and not explode with laughter. Smiling sideways, he calmly picked himself up off the ground, still shaking a little from the recent events. His performance had been a knockout. Klein swallowed him whole and now thought that the Scarlet Monarch existed. I'm sure that last clue is driving him crazy. I wish I could see his reaction when he connected me to it. I bet it was wonderful. It was too obvious. It would be impossible for Klein not to make 1 + 1 with his Harvey Wayne identity and his last words before taking him out of the City of Calamities. Ha! The smile on his face slowly faded until his lips were pressed together, a deep look on his face. So, the captain didn't make it, Mumbling, Adrian sighed a little. It seemed his attempt to save him had failed. It was obvious. He was a fundamental character in the useless writer's story. There was no way he would let him live standing between his target and him. The redhead couldn't help but wonder if someone else had died. Or if someone who wasn't supposed to die died. He could not know unless he asked the only witness he knew. But how do you approach him with that? Looking around at the smoke that covered everything, he just nodded softly. He sat down, a simple white beach chair materializing beneath him. If Klein was here, that meant the useless writer was here too. If the useless writer was in Lindbergh, that also meant that something would happen here. Considering the scale of the Great Smog of Backland in the original story, which the writer helped happen, then Ashera was in danger. Even the entirety of Lindbergh. Now, it only remains to be seen if Hunter Hallow can hide him from the sight of that feather. If a snake of Mercury of Sequence 1 could not see his destiny, Adrian hoped that meant the same for the author. And he couldn't forget the most important thing, if the useless writer was here. The 3-flavored soup was here too. I have no reason to believe that rotten soup isn't sealed in those ruins, but it would be complete suicide to think it still is. I have to take it as a given that it's here. His scarlet eyes cooled and gained an edge. I have to be careful. I made one mistake, and I'll be the pot of that soup. Leaning back a little, he just sighed. In the recent event, 2 of his theories had been confirmed. While Klein has Saphira Castle, he does not own it. He only has permission to enter. That's why when he was trapped in the puppet house, he couldn't access the castle. So there is no problem in bringing him here. Of course, my case is different. My connection to the City of Calamities is much stronger than his connection to Saphira Castle. This was obvious, even though Backland was in a similar state to the puppet house, both sealed off from the outside world. He had no problem entering and taking things out of the City of Calamities. Shaking his head, the red-haired man snapped his fingers. The smoke that covered the outskirts disappeared like a mirage, showing the city in the distance. But, unlike the previous times, he was not alone. If I'd shown him this, Klein would have thought he'd walked into an office. Adrian grumbled in boredom as he watched the fire soldiers move back and forth, responding to the orange flames. Now, surrounding the corner where he stored his money, ingredients, and Beander characteristics were several small orange flames, some pulsing a little. These were separated into groups, some huge and some much smaller. The difference in size was equal to that of a tower to a person. There were easily hundreds or even thousands of them. Adrian wasn't counting as each time he entered, there were even more. And this little guy here just keeps getting bigger. Smiling in satisfaction, the red-haired man looked at the larger group surrounded by a few smaller ones. That group as a whole was backland. A flame would pulse every few seconds, and a fire soldier would approach it. The largest in that group corresponded to all the prayers from East Borough. The rest were some from Sherwood Borough and a very few from Empress Borough. At that moment, one of the soldiers came towards him, carrying a notebook and pencil, and handed them over with a bow. Taking it with a simple nod and manifesting simple reading glasses, Adrian reviewed the sentences he had. After quickly reading the 10+ pages of prayers, the redhead closed the book and handed it to the fire soldier. Simple things. Summoning some of the city's power, Adrian extended some of his spirituality to the flames corresponding to these prayers. The smoke around him boiled a little before it mingled with his spirituality, surrounded and entered the flames. Ignoring the headache caused by pouring a good amount of spirituality all at once, he only sank deeper into the beach chair with another night's work accomplished. The things asked for were things he could give. Strength and wisdom went into his powers, so he just had to extend those to these people. The healing was more complicated but just as simple to solve. He just had to strengthen the speaker's body. If the evil wasn't too severe, it would deal with it independently. If it was too powerful for it, he would just use Talk Millennium to purify it. Everything is working fine. The voicemail is a total success. Ads by PubFuture. This way, he wouldn't confuse his teammates with other people. This whole system was how he dealt with prayers from various parts of the world. While most came from East Borough thanks to his actions there were still the odd council who were curious and tried their luck. There were the fire soldiers, whom the red-headed man very kindly used to separate and ignore the prayers. This is pretty good. In time, the people of East Borough will convert to my religion, and I'll have a good anchor base. I wonder how the annoying pigeon, Miss Evernight, and the unimportant one are getting on. The last one won't care much, but the other two lost a decent number of believers. He had yet to work on a suitable nickname for the god of steam and machinery, but for now, unimportant would do. Sighing, Adrian turned and looked behind him, where 5 flames floated quietly. With a thought, another flame joined them, making them 6. Those were Flora's, Charlotte's, Serena's, Hazel's, Klein's, and his own. Looking at the Tarot Club leader's flame, a warm smile formed on his lips. At least this time, your sacrifice was not in vain, Klein, Adrian said gently, his gaze softening. Ever since he had read the original story on his world, one of the things that had hurt him the most was that Klein was alone. Even though he was surrounded by friends and loved ones, that fact remained, a fact that only grew larger every time he reread it. Klein Moretti was a lonely existence that could never really open up to anyone. An existence that conveyed that loneliness through hundreds of pages that squeezed his heart and made him cry for it. Now that he was here, Adrian planned to change that. He would not allow Klein to be alone anymore. That is why he decided to reveal his status to the detective and have him pray to him, to give him something in return for his efforts, and to form a relationship that would ensure his future well-being. Also, for his and Klein's safety. With the things he knew had changed, and the millions that were still hidden. It was best for the transmigrators to be together. Honestly, he already considered the clown a good friend, one who was exceedingly easy to annoy, of course. Now all that's left is for him to see me the same way. Which might be a bit tricky. Haha. Knowing Klein, he would not contact him until the world was online and could use that mask to talk in the Saphira Castle. He didn't even realize it, but he acted like Gurman for a second there. Truly a fool, remembering their first meeting and how he could see the shadow of the crazy hunter, he couldn't but fangirl a bit. I can't wait to meet that persona. I wonder how long it would take me to break that mask, Fufu, Adrian said mischievously. The crazy hunter barely lost his cool, being on that really short list would be an honor. Laughing softly at the end, he shook his head and feigned the sensation of falling. He would have a busy few days. After all, not only did he have to start expanding, he also had to plan to kill someone, and for that, he needed the help of a particular spectator. Just before he fell, a sudden thought crossed his mind. If Evernight was his sugar mommy in the original story, I might as well be considered the sugar daddy. In his mind, it made sense. He fulfilled all the requirements to be one. Quote. A flat expression was born on his face. His expression began to crack every time he thought about it again, and he became agonized for holding it so tightly. Not being able to bear it, he let go. Ha 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 ha. The temperature was dropping with autumn approaching. August was ending, and it was showing in the orange leaves slowly covering Victoria Street trees. Unlike the others, who exhaled light white smoke, her green lips exhaled heavy gray clouds like a locomotive. Adjusting her jacket a little tighter, Vivian let out a soft sigh as she stood in front of the blue-domed building, where workers were repairing the roof and entering and exiting. In Ashera, it is pretty common to work on Saturdays until noon, especially for civilian builders. This time, she was dressed in a thick yellow dress with bronze details, and a bronze tiara held her hair back. She came ready, her briefcase with all the documents she would need in her right hand. Today was Saturday, the day she had agreed to start working with Harvey Wayne. Leaving Briarwood Chambers had been easy enough, if a little awkward. She'd barely worked there for 2 weeks, shy of her third. Even if it were any other workplace, it would still be weird to leave. When asked, she had barely explained that she had been offered a better opportunity elsewhere. While that was impolite, she didn't care much if she was honest. It fell into her role as barbarian, after all. Besides, you don't often meet such strange fellows as him. How could I miss such an opportunity? Smiling sideways, Vivian let the cigarette fall from her lips, and as soon as it hit the floor, she crushed it with her heel, stubbing it out. With her crime for the day committed, the lawyer entered the firm with a smile. Her heels echo across the tiles. She passed by the workers, who glanced momentarily at the beautiful lady and quickly turned their attention back to what they were doing. Several people were coming down and up the stairs. They were not dressed in the thick, sharp clothes one would expect from blue collars, but they were in good clothes, elegant even, clothes one would wear to work in an office rather than a construction site. There are a lot more people here. Noting the increase in staff, the barbarian whistled in surprise. With the funds the firm had, or rather, did not have, Vivian knew hiring that many staff along with the renovations and repairs would be impossible. So everything had to come out of Harvey Wayne's pocket. She doubted that the church would pay for this firm, so it was very likely that Harvey Wayne himself had hired all these people. How much money does that guy have? He must have a decent fortune to implement all these changes so quickly. The Church of the God of Knowledge and Knowledge must pay much better than she had thought. Her sight moved for a moment, quickly finding the well-groomed man from the last time she came a few days ago. Approaching him, Vivian wasted no time. "Hey Lanero, I have a visit with Mr. Wayne. Is he here?" she said flatly and somewhat bluntly, stunning Eleanor a bit. The assistant looked at the woman who had spoken to him, a little confused, looking a little familiar. He had to look at her face for a few seconds before he could remember where he had seen her. "It's that rude woman from last time." Eleanor grimaced, his mood flaring up a little. Remaining professional, he gave a slight bow and pointed elegantly with his palm towards the stairs. "Good morning, ma'am. Yes, Mr. Wayne is in his of. Don't care." Like last time and having gotten what she wanted, Vivian cut him off and started her way towards the stairs, leaving behind a frozen Eleanor. Lowering his hand, the man pressed his lips together, and one eyebrow twitched vigorously. "I hope Mr. Wayne doesn't hire someone like her. She'll only bring trouble," Beatrice said in her usual tired tone, approaching Eleanor from behind with a cup of coffee still steaming in her hand. She was not alone as Clara accompanied her, her own cup of coffee in hand. Both were wearing clothes that, while warm, were a little lighter than one would expect with the temperature dropping. This was simply because their office work ensured that they were always in a warm place. Looking around and seeing they were more or less alone, Eleanor hunched slightly and whispered, "I just hope it's not what I fear. If Mr. Wayne turns out to be someone like Mr. Dieter, I'd look like an idiot. I don't want to regret giving this place another chance." "I still don't know how Mr. Wayne convinced me to stay," Eleanor confessed incredulously. Clara looked at him sideways, calmly. "Mr. Wayne doesn't seem to be that kind of man. Besides, don't compare him to him. In the 1 week he's been here, he's done more than that guy did in the 4 years he's had the firm." "Don't remind me, Mrs. Clara," the assistant complained with an exasperated sigh. It was a miracle that the firm had survived until today. It would have been abandoned after 2 more months of mismanagement and bad investments. "Besides, we can't forget that he paid the firm's debts out of his own pocket," Clara whispered. "The only people who do that are one of 3, stupid people who don't know how to use their brains, stupid rich people who can throw both money and dirty laundry away, and lastly, the highly ambitious ones who want to achieve something. Ads by PubFuture. In my eyes, it's clear which class Mr. Wayne falls into. The older members looked around, from the tilers fixing and replacing tiles to the masons and carpenters fixing the walls. Finally, they looked at the newer workers talking to Thomas and William, asking what they should do. Beatrice gave a subtle nod and took a soft sip of her bitter coffee. I hope he's the kind of man who knows what he's doing. ... Next time, I'm going to set a clock aside to measure how long it takes you to get here, Harvey said as he lowered his red fountain pen and looked up at Vivian, who snorted ungraciously. It's 7:40. It was only 10 minutes. She groaned a little. It wasn't that late. What was the deal? It'd be 15, and I'd be the one looking for you, Harvey commented, shooting her a bored look. While there was no threat, the barbarian couldn't help but be startled. Understood. Straightening with a jolt, Vivian replied nervously. She didn't want a high-level leader of the Wise Owls chasing after her. Thank you very much. Said man shook his head softly, the corners of his lips raised in clear amusement. Raising a gloved hand, he pointed it at the seat before the desk. Bringing her fist to her lips and pretending to clear her throat, Vivian heeded the unspoken command and sat down. Placing her briefcase on her lap and her fingers on the latch, she pressed. Click. Just as she was about to start pulling out her documents to present to the man, his voice stopped her. What are you doing? Raising her eyes, Vivian looked at him, a little lost. I'll give you my documents so you can check them so I can be hired. Wasn't it obvious? She said the last in her heart, not having the courage to say it to his face. At her response, Harvey gave her a flat look. Documents that are fake. Single quote. Single quote. Vivian stared at him for a few seconds in silence, her body unnaturally still. Wow, looks like you saw a ghost. Harvey hissed in surprise at how white she had become. Don't worry. I couldn't care less if your identity is fake, you could be a man, and I wouldn't give a damn. Waving his gloved hand back and forth disinterestedly, he added, do you know how many people with false identities enter the country? As long as you do no harm and keep a decently low profile, we couldn't care less even if we wanted to. Oh, stumbling a little, Vivian couldn't help but sigh a sigh of relief. For a good moment, she thought something was going to happen to her, but luckily, it was just a horrible scare. Click. Closing her briefcase, she placed it at her side, the corners of her lips quivering uncomfortably and the tips of her ears a little red. Of course, he would know. He is an official, after all. If she could investigate him, it was obvious that Harvey Wayne, a wise owl, could do the same. And much more easily, considering he didn't have to worry about getting caught. As she thought about her slip of the tongue, Harvey pulled some papers out of one of his desk drawers and held them out to her. Just sign this, and you can start working here. Take your time to read it if you like, but finish before 8, I have a job for you that I need you to complete as soon as possible. What kind of job? Vivian asked as she grabbed the spread-out papers and carefully reviewed them. Harvey laughed softly. It's pretty simple, don't worry. I want you to help me change the name of the firm. Vivian nodded at his words, entirely agreeing with what he wanted to do. Without looking up from the contract, she replied, you now have the titles and name of Apex Financial Solution, and the previous owner gave you total control without any conditions or restrictions. We would only have to visit the hacienda on Pondard Street in the Euclid district to change the name. They are open daily, so we only need the documents I mentioned. We can go once I finish what I'm doing. While the firm had once been respected and valued, its name was now nothing more than bad publicity that would drive away potential clients. The most obvious move was to change the name, to show that the firm was no longer the same as before, and to gain more confidence from people wanting to walk through its doors. With that in mind, she added, do you have a name in mind? Harvey laughed softly before saying with a knowing smile, you can say that. Ads by PubFuture. Following her instinct, Vivian didn't decide to probe the subject but changed it. Raising her employment contract and eyebrow, she pointed to a part of it. Having gone through legal documents and their trappings were her specialty, so she had already reread it 4 times and found no traps. Her salary and schedule were all in order. There was only one thing that confused her. Returning to a specific part of the contract, she asked, I understand about legal advisor, but why is personal secretary also added? At her question, the member of the Wise Owls didn't answer immediately, he just gave a short laugh, his eyes twinkling a little. I have to keep an eye on you, remember? Harvey replied sweetly, his smile teasing. Vivian could only press her lips together, suddenly finding herself extremely uncomfortable. This guy was not only dangerous, he was also weird. Grandfather always said that members of the Wise Owls had their quirks. Though I doubt he was referring to this. A while later, after signing the document and making their recruitment official, Vivian and Harvey left the office, carrying the briefcase with everything needed for the firm's name change. The former group watched as their boss left the building with complicated looks on their faces. After a few seconds of looking at each other, the first to break the silence was an expressionless Beatrice. I thought he'd like them younger. But Mr. Wayne seems to like his wine well aged, she said, her lips slightly raised at Clarice's giggle and Eleanor's blush. Both women looked at the younger man and could only chuckle. How easy it was to tease the young. The next day. Potato Street, Unit 3-6, Klein's apartment. Putting down the newspaper, Klein could only rub his forehead to soothe his headache. What's going through that guy's head? The detective was at a loss. Was this some kind of signal? A way of saying it was safe to talk in the real world? Considering his personality, I'm sure it's just another way for him to tease me. Why couldn't the housemaid be someone quieter? I don't know if I want to imagine what he did on Earth, maybe he was a mobster. It would make sense, he's quite the personality. You're as bold as Emperor Russell, Mr. Chariot. I bet you two would get along wonderfully. Though at least you used something fictional. Not from a real person. In that respect, the Emperor still beats you. Klein lampooned a little as he read the name on the advertisement. It wasn't on the front page, and it wasn't a big statement. It was just a small rectangle in the business area, more towards the middle of the paper. Maybe some journalist heard it, or the man decided to pay for some publicity. Less than greater than. A new beginning. We left the past behind but didn't abandon it, we learned from it. Apex Financial Solution is no more. A new company will take its place and build on it. Wayne Enterprises awaits you on Victoria Street, 7:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. If you have a business idea or need an investment for a project you are working on, we are here to help. Your future and comfort is our priority. Less than greater than. Klein sighed again. Chariot not only had the look, the name, the resources, but now he had the company. The only thing missing is that he also has the Batcave somewhere. Maybe some Robin, too, why not? He has the resources, and considering he dared to hand over one of his men to me, a hidden god, he has manpower too. On the bright side, now he had a topic of conversation when they officially introduced themselves. But to be honest, he was more of a Marvel guy.